IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Tuesday, and today we have another really fun show coming your guys' way. A couple of interesting topics, and obviously you guys can tell by the title of the show. We're going to start this out by talking about if Notre Dame has a championship caliber roster. Now, we're going to give somewhat of a criteria of what we believe to be a championship caliber roster. They kind of talk about where Notre Dame meets in some of those areas, and then some of the areas where we still have a few question marks. And then we're going to broaden the scope a little bit in the next part of the show. And we're going to talk about the top 10. We are going to rank the top 10 rosters in college football this year, which will be another really fun discussion. We're talking about it through the scope of what our criteria is for being a championship caliber roster. And it'll be a really fun discussion. Then we're going to take everything home today with a quick daily mailbag. So if you guys have questions coming in throughout the show, don't hesitate to throw those in the chat. You can put MB for mailbag or a little mailbox emoji. Lets us know to set your question aside. Obviously, super chats can bump to the top. But, Brian, this is a really interesting conversation because we've talked a lot about the individual pieces of Notre Dame's roster. We've broken down quarterback room and tight ends and O-line and D-line and secondary. But when you put it all together, this is a pretty darn good roster.
Yeah, and I think the question stems from, I don't think because we came up with it, but the question stems from conversations that touch on several levels, right? And just so you guys know, you're getting a free show today on the YouTube channel because for some reason YouTube's not allowing monetization. So you guys are getting a freebie today. Just enjoy that one. But just thought I'd throw that out there. But it's like, okay, so we know Notre Dame has a really good roster. We think they have one of the best rosters in college football. And there's these extremes of like, okay, well, I'm worried about this. I'm concerned about this. This is a question. That's a question. This is an unknown. That's an unknown. Mr. Show Me over here is always looking at that, which we love. And then there's also the conversation of like, okay, the other extreme is how would Notre Dame, if they reach their potential, fare against like 19 LSU and 01 Miami kind of thing, right? So like there's these two extremes. And then the question is, okay, so just because they have maybe the best roster in 2026 or one of the best rosters in 2026, does that mean that their roster is elite? Or is it more a byproduct of it being a down year in college football, which we talked about last year? I don't know that there was an elite team last year. Obviously, Indiana was the best team. And I was talking to a buddy last night. There was a question on our message board a few days ago about, let's say Notre Dame got in over Miami, what would their path have looked like? And I said, I think they would have beat A&M more convincingly than Miami did. I think the Ohio State game might have been a little bit more competitive than the Miami game. And just because, again, it's about matchups, and is Notre Dame good enough in the trenches on both sides of the ball to be able to have physically done what they did, what Miami did to Ohio State? I don't know. I think Notre Dame would have beat Ole Miss more convincingly than Miami did. But I think there's this feeling like, oh, if Notre Dame would have played Indiana, they'd have smacked them. I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that. You know what I mean? Like, maybe they win, maybe they don't. This is not the same Indiana team from last year. It isn't. It's a better Indiana team than last year. But the thing we agree on, Trevor, is whether Notre Dame would or wouldn't have beaten Indiana last year. The reality is that I don't view the Indiana as an elite team. I don't think Indiana beats 2024 Ohio State. I think they beat 23 Michigan. They don't beat 22 Georgia. They don't beat 21 Georgia. They don't beat 20 Alabama. They don't beat 19 LSU. They don't beat 18 Clemson. Maybe they beat 17 Alabama. I think they could have beat 17 Alabama. But like, was it an elite team? I don't know. So is Notre Dame just the best of a bunch of really good teams, or do they truly have an elite roster? And so that's where this premise comes from. And then we're going to talk at the end, like, what are the 10 best rosters? And part of that discussion is going to be, okay, here's our 10, but which ones are elite and which ones aren't? Because, so at some point in time, elite stops and really good starts in a ranking. Is it all 10? Is it 8? Is it 7? Is it 6? 4? Is there only 1 or 2? We're going to answer that too, Trev. But I think the show begins by explaining really what an elite roster looks like. And for the understanding of where we're at, there's going to be a little bit of projection here. We're projecting what we think will be. We're not going to get into the, well, if this happens, if that happens. We are projecting what we think will happen with certain rosters. So when we talk about Notre Dame, we're projecting that the offensive line is going to play to a certain level. When you talk about Alabama's roster, we're projecting that the quarterback play will be to a certain level that we think. That factors into the conversation. When we talk about Ohio State, we project, okay, I think these guys are going to step in the defensive secondary and perform at a certain level, and that's where our projection comes from. And so those things, this is meant to look at what we think the talent level is, and when you're talking talent, you can be a little bit loose with a projection of what we think it will be. And of course, that'll kind of determine how the season goes. But it is looking more at it from a talent standpoint. So assuming an upside potential. So like we look at Devin Sanchez for Ohio State. We'll use not Notre Dame as an example. Well, I think he can be really good. And if we're ranking teams just on, top 25, we may ding Ohio State a little bit for that question mark, or the fact that, we don't know that Edric Houston is going to be able to step in and do what, guys at law. But in this conversation, we're looking at the God-given talent of a Devin Houston and an Edric Houston, or Devin Sanchez and an Edric Houston, and projecting a little bit just the talent of the roster. How well that talent reaches its full potential will determine who wins the most games this season. But that's kind of a look at it. And it's a little bit different than we normally do, where normally we take into experience and we take into proven production and things like that. This is a little bit more of a projection because it's focused more on the talent than the reality of where teams are today. So I just wanted to set that stage, Trev, so people can understand kind of where we are with this conversation.
Yeah, makes sense completely. So let's kind of build a framework for what this conversation is going to be, and it really goes into what makes a championship caliber roster. And there's a couple of factors that go in here, Brian. And obviously, you have to have talent and talent across the board. We've seen Notre Dame rosters before with great individual talent, but in 2015, we believed that they could have made a run. They could have made some noise in the playoffs, if this, if that. And we've had that conversation plenty of times. But it's not just having Jalen Smith on one side of the ball and having Will Fuller on the other side of the ball. You need other factors at play here. The 2015 team comes to mind when I think of that. The 18 team comes to mind when I think about that. The 12 team comes to mind when I think about those things. So obviously talent across the board is going to be a huge factor. The other piece is depth. And that's something we've talked a lot about Notre Dame's roster this upcoming season. Is it's not just the teams and not just the players at the top of the roster. What does the depth look like? What does it look behind Leonard Moore? What does it look like behind Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison? What does it look like behind Boubacar Traore and Bryce Young? So depth is another key piece. And then being good at key areas. We've seen teams before where it's, hey, man, they got the best wide receiver in the country. They have the Biletnikoff Award winner. Yeah, well, Notre Dame had the Biletnikoff Award winner in 2009, and they went 6-6. And so you have to be able to have good talent at multiple spots. You can have the best safety in the country, but if you have a bottom half ranked defensive line, it's kind of all for naught. And so all of these pieces, all of these cogs in this machine have to start working together. And that's kind of some of our other criteria that go into this. We're projecting forward talent, but as far as just a checklist that we can look and see on a roster of, okay, they have depth of talent, they have talent across the board. Those are some of the other things that make up a championship caliber roster. And Brian, when you start talking about Notre Dame, there's a lot of that.
There's so many different things. I think another thing to add to that conversation of what makes a championship roster is having fewer question marks, having fewer holes. Where if man, you've got an elite receiving core and you're elite here and elite there, but man, I don't know about that offensive line, and I don't know if they can cover anybody in the secondary. Do you have an elite roster, or do you have certain elite groups? And the interesting thing when you look at Notre Dame, Travis, even on some mediocre teams that Notre Dame has had in the past years, they've had elite units. I mean, I love your example of the 2009 receiving core Biletnikoff winner. But remember, for a chunk of that season, they not only had Golden Tate, they had Michael Floyd. And before Michael Floyd got hurt and missed some time, he was their go-to receiver, not the Biletnikoff winner. And you talk about an elite quarterback that year. That was about it. I mean, they were very mediocre in the offensive line. They were solid at running back. Their defensive line was very mediocre. Their secondary was solid. Their linebacking core was young and had potential, but had some issues as well. So, there's been years where Notre Dame, the 2016 team, had two All-American offensive linemen. They had areas where that team was very good. that receiving core was very talented with Equanimous St. Brown and Kevin Stefferson and Torrey Hunter Jr. and C.J. Sanders. And, I mean, there was talent on that team. And the running back room, you had Josh Adams, who was Dexter Williams, Tony Jones Jr. You had positions. Quarterback room, Deshaun Kaiser, Malik Zaire. There were areas where, boy, you were really good. But as a whole, there were too many big flaws on not even just the coaching. Like, take the coaching aside, because obviously that made that team worse. But when you go into a season and, yeah, you're really good up front, but you've got Avery Sebastian and a future will linebacker playing safety in Drew Tranquil, do you have an elite secondary? Do you have an elite defense? And those are things that factor into it, Trev. And when we look at like what goes into a talented roster, an elite roster, I think at the very least you need an experienced, talented quarterback. It doesn't have to be an elite quarterback. Will Howard be an example in 2024? We could debate till the cows come home whether or not Fernando Mendoza is elite. I heard Todd McShay in a thing yesterday talking about how he was the first on board about Fernando Mendoza being a first-round draft pick. And I'm like, maybe he was first on board talking about the draft. We weren't that. We don't talk about the draft. But we were very early on in I think this is a great pickup. But is he an elite player? But he's at least a very talented, experienced quarterback that then played at an elite level. And so I think you need at least that foundation to be an elite roster. It's hard to be that in today's era if you don't at least have a really talented quarterback to some degree that has some experience. And I think that's obviously a box that Notre Dame checks in impressive fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo the same sentiment that you do. I mean, there's a lot of past national championship winners. Like, look, every team, every college that has won a national championship in the recent years, especially during the playoff era, not every year have they had an elite quarterback. I don't think Stetson Bennett was elite. Right. I think he was a good, experienced, talented quarterback that benefited from the roster around him. That's not a knock.
Very good college quarterback. He wasn't an elite quarterback by any stretch. Yeah,
absolutely. I felt the same way about Will Howard. We can have a debate about, like Mac Jones. Some people view him higher than others. I think he had an elite season statistically, but as a talent, I don't know if I would say that is an elite guy. Right. So a lot of those quarterbacks fit that mold, and I'm with you, man. Notre Dame absolutely has that. And, they have a returning projected Heisman Trophy favorite on FanDuel. Returning its starting quarterback with C.J. Carr on the roster. It's the Notre Dame's first returning starter since 2020. And it didn't take too long for him to get meaningful experience. Mm-hmm. He was thrown into the fire his first two starts. At night on the road against Miami, who ended up playing for the national championship, get a bye, and then you're at home at night in your home opener against Texas A&M, another team that made the playoffs. And so, like the experience he brings to the table, he added night games against USC, road games against Pitt, road games against Arkansas to that resume. So they absolutely check that box. I'm with you. I'm with you completely.
I think another thing, Trev, when you look at it, it's with last year with CJ, there needed to be some level of projection with him. And there are teams like that. Like that's where Alabama is right now. When we talk about ranking the top 10 teams, that'll be a team that we're going to talk about. Where do they stand? There's times where it's like, okay, how does Texas Tech's quarterback project from what he did at one school to another? Those are all parts of the conversation. But when we talk about Notre Dame's roster and Notre Dame's quarterback position, and to answer a question, a good question from Tom Redinger in the chat, we're talking about the players on the field and on the roster. We're not talking about coaching staff. We're talking about the actual football players on a roster. That's why we say this isn't a ranking of a top 25. This is just actually a roster, because I don't think that Indiana had the best roster in 2025. They had a top 5 to 8 roster with a top 1 to 2 coaching staff, and that's why they went out and won a championship. And it helped that one of the teams that had two of the teams that I would argue had top 10 rosters weren't in the playoffs in Notre Dame and Texas. One deserved to be in, one didn't, but those are two of the better rosters in college football. But when you look at CJ, the nice thing for Notre Dame this year, Trev, is you're not projecting anymore. There's a level of proven aspect to his elite talent. And what we've seen this spring is an even better version of CJ Carr. But even if he just basically is a slightly more experienced version of what he was last year, they still check this box for me. It doesn't take – my point is it doesn't take a lot of projection to have CJ Carr here on this list.
Absolutely. And I mean, outside of – I mean, in my eyes, I think CJ Carr on Notre Dame's offense is the player that you need to use the least amount of projection. Maybe Jordan Faison, but he's kind of that guy for Notre Dame's offense this year. Kind of like what Jeremiah Love was going into 2025. I didn't need a whole lot of projection with Jeremiah Love to see how good he was going to be in 25. It was just how good can he be? And that's the same conversation we're having with CJ Carr. Now, with Notre Dame's roster, where we do have to use a little bit more projection than the quarterback position is in the trenches. Being strong in the trenches is another essential of having an elite roster. And, you know, you either have to be very, very good on one side of like elite caliber. I think of like Clemson's 2018 trenches. Their defensive line was elite. I mean, first round pick after first round pick, and their offensive line was good. It wasn't elite in the same way that their defensive line was, but you have to have one or the other. And this is where the projection comes in slightly with Notre Dame's roster. And I think they're built really well in the trenches.
I think answering this question in regard to Notre Dame on both sides of the ball is going to be determined by whether or not you're talking talent or whether or not you're talking what I can reasonably say is proven about the unit. And when the conversation we're having is more built on just talent. And talent, there is a level of experience that's needed from a talent standpoint, because we had a question yesterday that was Notre Dame will have at least 3 consensus All-Americans on their offensive line at some point in time in their career. And we talked about how they've had that before. In 2017, Notre Dame had 4 consensus All-Americans on their offensive line. But the 2017 offensive line that we saw on the field didn't have that, because 2 of those guys were true redshirt freshmen who didn't really play a meaningful down until the following season, and they didn't become consensus All-Americans for 4 years. Talking about Aaron Banks. Actually, Aaron Banks was a freshman that year. Liam Meikenberg was a redshirt freshman that year. Like, those guys didn't become consensus All-American caliber players for a couple years. And so, like, that's where talent has to there is a projection of what will you be in 2026, because Grayson McHugh is an elite talent, but I don't know that I'd feel the same way about the Notre Dame offensive line if the starting offensive line was going to be Grayson McHugh, left to right, Grayson McHugh, Ben Nichols, Sullivan Garvin, Tyler Merrill, and Matty Augustine. Like 4 or 5 very talented players that are freshmen or redshirt freshmen. I think several of those players have a chance to eventually be elite players in Notre Dame, but they're not going to be that as true freshmen. So there is a level of where are you in your development that has to factor into this, Trev. And so, like, right now, Alabama will be a bit of a question mark at quarterback from a talent standpoint because of the experience part, but I'll be confident in saying that you and I won't be having that same question mark next season when we project forward to having those guys with a year under their belt. So when you look at Notre Dame, the offensive line, I think the combination of God-given talent plus experience with that God-given talent is why I think you could argue that at the very least, this is a very good offensive line. So when I did my rankings to try to put these lists together, because we didn't just go with gut. We compared rosters and different things. The one thing that I did is I took the categories we talked about: quarterback, O-line, D-line, skill offense, skill defense, experience, depth. Do you have elite players? Was a box that we felt needed to be checked. And when I look at the offensive line, Trevor, it's either elite, very good, good, or question mark. That's basically how I ranked it. I, at the very least, have Notre Dame as a very good offensive line, which is from a talent standpoint, which is where I think the 2 teams that won a championship last year were. Because there were areas they had elite players, Francis Malnoa, for example, like at right tackle. But then there's areas where they just had good players, James Brockermeyer, Matthew McCoy, guys like that. As a unit, they were outstanding because they had very good talent. Will Notre Dame's offensive line play as a unit at a high level? I don't know that. We'll see. But this is at least a very good talent-wise offensive line. And I would argue that it's an elite talent offensive line if I had more confidence that Ashton Craig is going to be 100%. That's what keeps me from saying it's elite right now, is just I need to see how a kid that's had a second knee injury is going to look in the fall, because a healthy Ashton Craig is maybe what puts it over the top right now. And then obviously the fact that Will Black has never played a meaningful down. But I think you could debate that the talent is elite. I just say just the raw physical talent is elite. But when you add a little bit of the experiential part in it, that's what, for me, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Trev, drags it just a little bit down into that is the lack of experience at that left tackle spot, and then the injury to Ashton Craig are the things that make it. Because what I'm trying to do in this conversation, Trevor, is be overly objective, so we don't just come out here and say they're elite everywhere, they're amazing, they're going to beat everyone by 40. Let's just go ahead and when Indiana brings that championship trophy to South Bend, let's just go and leave it in South Bend. Like, we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to really have a critical eye towards this and say, that's why I say the God-given tools is elite, but I just need to see how Will Black handles that left tackle spot, and I need to know about the health of Ashton Craig to be able to say, because it's like right there, like right on the verge of being elite right now. And if Will Black was a redshirt sophomore instead of a redshirt freshman, I don't care who the center is. You know what I mean? So that's kind of why I don't have it quite elite yet, Trev. And I had that, honestly, that same kind of grade with a lot of the offensive lines that we're going to look at. There was only one offensive line that I graded out as elite right now, and that was Indiana's, because they returned basically 4 starters, essentially. They return 3 starters, and then they bring in an all Big Ten guard, Joe Bruner. So that's what I mean by like 4 high-level Big Ten caliber starters. God-given tools, I think Notre Dame's got better tools than the Indiana line. I don't even think it's overly close. But when you factor in the talent plus experience plus the knowns, that's where I just think there's that little bit of separation. And I was a little bit critical, but it certainly has elite potential, and they're not very far from reaching that elite potential, Trev.
Yeah, absolutely. They're significantly closer to being an elite offensive line than they are to just being a good offensive line, if we were looking at it on this scale. I'm with you. The hardest part about projecting forward with some players is kind of what we ran into with Bryce Young last year. A lot of people look at the potential that he had, and he's like, he's going to have 11 sacks in 2025. It's like, hey, some of this is more of a process. And that's how I feel a little bit about Will Black. That's how I felt about Gerby Lambert last year when we heard he was stepping into the starting lineup. At some point in time, he's going to be an elite offensive lineman. Yeah. An elite offensive lineman. But I don't know if that happens in September of 2025, October of 2025, or September of 2027. And that's kind of the conversation we have to have with Will Black. I'm with you. We kind of have to kind of toe that line a little bit of this is an absolutely elite talent. But is he going to look like that, an elite talent in 2026? Or is it going to be, hey, we see the signs, and once he puts it together and has another full off season of development, 2027, he enters the conversation as the best left tackle coming back in college football, or one of. And then with the center position, it's one of those things, Brian, where it's like, and this is just me, and it's the show me person in me. I'm always going to have a little bit of that, even in projection conversations. There's going to be a level of uncertainty with me at the center position until the season's over. Because the second that the next time Ashton Craig plays a full season as their starting center will be the first time he plays a full season as their starting center. So that's where I'm at with that one.
But to your point, that's a different conversation than a talent conversation. And that, like, once he comes back healthy, then the conversation about talent is over. The question is now about, okay, can he stay healthy? But that doesn't factor into a talent conversation. And I think your point about Will Black is a really good one, Trev, because what's he going to be? Is he going to be Gerby Lambert, which is a really good redshirt freshman that's a little up and down and learning, or is he going to be second-year version of Joe Alt? Like, that's what we don't know. Is he going to be redshirt freshman version of Quentin Nelson? Like we don't know that answer. And so that's why I have it slightly there. But I think that of the units that we are going to talk about today, I think that I would put them number 2 behind Indiana, just to give you some context of where they are. Because again, this isn't being elite roster doesn't mean you're elite everywhere. And that's where now looking on the other side of the ball, the defensive line, Trevor, they're same thing. I don't have them on the elite level. I think their production can be elite. I don't think the talent is elite. The thing here's what will determine whether or not that's changed. There's two players who I have question marks about this team this season that will determine whether or not this defensive line will be elite. Right now, it's very, very good, which is essentially, again, that's what Indiana was last year. They weren't elite on either side of the ball from a talent standpoint. They had elite production and elite coaching, but they were just very good talent-wise. And that's where I view Notre Dame right now on the defensive line. And what will determine whether or not they're elite or not is the maturity of two rising juniors. One is Bryce Young, the other's Tion Gray. Those two guys' emergence is what determines whether or not this thing becomes elite real quick. And again, being a little extra critical, factoring in a little bit of the proven aspect to it, that's why I say, okay, when I'm comparing Notre Dame's defensive line to like Oregon's, for example, I could argue that Bryce Young, from a just God-given talent standpoint, is every bit as good as the two edge rushers for Oregon. But here's the difference. If I'm going to compare the two and we're trying to compare talent on the roster, those guys are far more proven and have shown that they can turn their talent into football production. And Bryce hasn't done that to the same degree, right? Mateo Uiagalelei has 52 pressures last year. The Teote kid had 38 pressures last year. You know, he had double-digit sack numbers last year. Bryce has to take that final step. And then Tion Gray was part of that rotation last year. Does he make that year 3 jump? I think that's the question mark. Boubacar's an elite prospect, like in my opinion. He's an elite talent. Yeah, his game needs to grow and all that, but he's an elite talent. Like, we can put him in that category. Is Bryce actually an elite talent on the football field, or is he just an elite athlete? Because I don't care about elite athleticism. We're talking about elite football talent is what this conversation is about, which we probably should have specified. If you're a 4.3, it doesn't mean you're a talented wide receiver. It just means you're fast. You got to be 4.3 and able to get off press, run a route, and catch a football to have actual receiver talent. You know what I mean? That's why Tim Brown was always better than James Jett. So that's kind of the factor here. Those are the two guys that keep this on the verge of, is it really elite? I think you could argue that it is, Trev, and I'm curious because we didn't discuss beforehand our actual ranking for each position group. So I'm actually curious, do you agree with that assessment, Trev, or do you actually consider it an elite group right now from a talent standpoint?
From a talent standpoint, it's very close. And you could argue, we could have the debate on which one's closer, the offensive line or the defensive line. And both are, the biggest takeaway is both are exceptionally close. The two that, I don't think it's an elite defensive line yet. And the two that unlock that for me, one we share, and that's Bryce Young. You have to have a good counterpart as an edge rusher. The best championship caliber defensive lines that we've seen over the last couple of years, it's not just a guy. And we've seen talented NFL draft prospect defensive ends at Notre Dame get shut down when it's just a one-sided argument on the defensive line. The other player that it comes down for me is Armel Mukam. We're going on our 3rd year of talking about how talented Armel Mukam is and what he could be. And now, okay, you made the decision to withdraw your name from the transfer portal. You're back at Notre Dame. You have multiple years of eligibility left, and you're starting over with a clean slate with Charlie Partridge coming in. Now is the time to really unleash that talent. You know, we can sit here and talk about stories about, hey, there was an NFL scout at this practice, and he kept asking who 88 was. It's like, that's awesome. But now I want that conversation to go from happening at practice to, yo, did you see 88 on Saturday on the road down in Provo? Hey, man, did you see what 88 just did at Miami's interior offensive line? He was unstoppable, man. And he's that player for me that takes it from that really, really good defensive line unit to then rounding out what could be an elite interior defensive line rotation. So Armel Mukam's in that conversation for me, but in short, I don't think it's elite yet, but it's on the verge. It's very close.
None of this gives me pause about Notre Dame's season, however. And here's why. Because, again, to be an elite roster, you don't have to be elite at every position. To check all the boxes of an elite roster of being very good in the trenches, you don't have to be elite necessarily on either side of the ball. You just have to be at least very good. And I think we saw that last year. I would argue Miami was elite on the defensive line. Yeah. I would argue that. I don't think their offensive line was an elite talent unit as a whole. it had some elite players, just like the Notre Dame offensive line has some elite players. The Notre Dame defensive line has some elite players. The difference between Notre Dame's defensive line in 2026 and Miami's defensive line in 2025, based on what we know right now, is Miami had 2 guys that were elite on the defensive line. Notre Dame has 1. And that's, to me, the difference. Miami had 1 guy that was a proven elite player. Notre Dame doesn't have any on the offensive line. Having said that, I would argue right now that if you were to say, okay, Brian, you got to pick one that you view as being elite, it would be an easy decision for me. It'd be the offensive line, just from a talent standpoint. I think Notre Dame might have the most God-given gifted, talented tackle tandem in the country. Now, will they have the best tackle tandem in the country? That's where experience, all that stuff comes into play. But if we're just talking when it's all said and done and we look forward 5 years from now, which tackle tandem in college football right now will have the most All-Americans and highest draft picks of guys starting in 2026? I think it'll be Notre Dame. The question is, will Will Black play to that level in 2026? Will Gerby Lambert play like a really good right tackle this year or an elite right tackle this year? He's eventually going to be an elite right tackle. Will that be in 26 or 27? But the talent, I would argue, is greater on the offensive line even than the defensive line. There's more future top 25 draft picks on the offensive line than there are on the defensive line. Well, actually, let me correct that. There's more top 10 caliber picks on the offensive line than the defensive line for Notre Dame at the present moment.
Let's talk about the next ingredient to an elite roster, and that's high-quality skilled talent on both sides of the ball. And it also goes into having at least one high skill level player on both sides of the football. And Brian, for this conversation, let's start on defense because this one's the obvious one. You have Leonard Moore. He's the best returning cornerback in the country. He is your certified elite player on the back end at the skill position. And he's not just the only one. There's other players that have a little bit of ways to go to catch up to where Leonard Moore is at. But right now, as of today, we can sit down and say because of his track record, what he's done, the physical tools he brings to the table, and what we believe his 26 season is going to be, Leonard Moore's that elite player. He was a unanimous All-American as a true sophomore.
I think there's several. When you ask this question, we'll start with the defense and then turn to the offense. Do you have elite skill talent? And for the purposes of this, skill talent will also include linebackers because it's the big skill and the little skill, so to speak. And I think when you look at that, there's no question that Notre Dame has elite talent. And you mentioned just take Leonard Moore out of the equation. If Notre Dame didn't have a Leonard Moore, would we still consider this an elite back end of the defense? Linebacker, secondary? And my answer would be yes. Would it be as good? No, obviously. But would I still consider it elite? Yeah, I think I would. And the reason why is because you have other elite talent. Some of it's more proven than others, but you have an elite safety tandem. I think Tay Johnson's an elite talent. I think we can say that right now. He's an elite talent. Don Schuler's an outstanding college football player. Then you have other talented players that, Dallas Golden, Christian Gray, DJ McKinney, Jaden Sanders, Mark Zachary, Kari Adams, Aiden Pouncey, Chaz Smith. Like there's a lot of talent there. And so when I look at Notre Dame and say, is Leonard Moore the only reason they're elite? And my answer is no. Because you can have an elite defensive back and not have an elite secondary. It's like with anything, like you mentioned with when we talked about the Notre Dame receiving corps and in 2009, you can have a great receiving corps. It doesn't mean that your offense is elite, and the same thing here. So I think it's the entirety of the room, having Tay Johnson, having a Don Schuler, having guys like Dallas Golden and Christian Gray and DJ McKinney and players like that is a big Jaden Sanders is a big reason why I think it's elite. And then I think you also have the best linebacker room in college football from a talent and an experience standpoint. Kingston Viliama-Asa is an elite talent. I think Drake Bowen is a borderline elite talent. I think Jaden Osbury and Jalen Sneed are both very talented players. Mad Faramo is a very talented player. That's an elite linebacker room, in my opinion. So I think that one's an easy one. Offensively, Trev, it's a little bit of a different – it's a little bit more of a projection, but I do think it's an elite skill talent on offense. Number one, take the quarterback out of the equation, but that factors into a degree. Because of the depth of talent at wide receiver and running back and tight end, I do think the talent is elite. Now, do they have to prove it? Yes. Has anyone stepped up and proven that? No, they haven't. But there's two ways to be elite. One is the way Ohio State's elite, where they have one proven elite player. After that, a lot of question marks, not as much depth. Now, they've got a really talented freshman coming in and, but like there's one elite player. If I'm ranking Notre Dame's and Ohio State's receivers right now, and I'm coming up with the top 10, my opinion, there's more Notre Dame guys in the top 5 than there are Ohio State guys in the top 5. But there's a big difference between number 1 and number 2, right? Jeremiah Smith and anybody else, right? So that makes Ohio State's receiving corps elite because the rest of the talent's good enough with that guy to be elite. Notre Dame is sort of the opposite argument. I don't know that there's one elite future first-round talent, but there's a ton of really good football players in that room. I think the same thing is true at tight end. And you could say, well, Ian Premer's elite. Yeah, but I'm not really banking on a freshman being the reason that your unit is elite, just like I'm not doing that with Ohio State. I'm not going to sit there and argue that Ohio State's receiving corps is the best in the country because of my expectation of Chris Henry. He's got to prove that a little bit to me since he's a true freshman. And that's a bit of a difference for me. But I think as a whole, when you look at the skill talent at running back, Aeneas Williams, Kedron Young, Nolan James, the two talented freshmen, because I will count freshmen more at running back than I will in any other position, as we've talked about. When you look at Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, Quincy Porter, Mylan Graham, Elijah Burris, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, the freshman class, that matters. Cooper Flanagan, James Flanagan. I think you look at all those things, and to me, Notre Dame has a top 4 to 5 group of skill players. Are there teams that have better? Yes. But I think their depth of talent is why I think they check the boxes as they have an elite roster on both sides of the ball, because it goes back to that question that we got asked yesterday. Micah Gilbert's the difference between Notre Dame having a really good receiving corps and an elite receiving corps. And the fact that answer's was a sell in our buy so hold is why I'm so confident in this receiving corps, because it's not Micah Gilbert or bust like it used to be. It's not Jaden Greathouse healthy or bust like it used to be. With all due respect to Will Pauling, if Jaden Greathouse goes down again this year and my options for the slot are either Jordan Faison inside at the slot with Mylan Graham outside, or Jordan Faison in the slot with Elijah Burris or Cam Williams, or even a Micah Gilbert to the field, or leave Faison at X and then put Mylan Graham at Z or Elijah Burris at Z. Either way, I feel a whole lot better about my field duo than I did a year ago when Will Pauling came in, who's a nice, solid player. But these are day 1, day 2 caliber talents. He's a really athletic, solid football player. And that's kind of where I'm at over this one. So I think the skill talent across the board is elite when you put it all together. You could make a case that the receiving corps by itself, the tight end room by itself, and the running back room by itself is maybe not elite right now because of the lack of proven production. I think that's debatable. But when you put all of them together, that's what makes the skill talent on offense elite, Trev.
Yeah, the name of the game for Notre Dame's skilled position groups is the sum of all of its parts. Because I'm with you. The wide receiver room specifically is the one where we separate the most proven production versus top-level talent. Because your most proven guy coming back in Jordan Faison from 2025 is not the most talented receiver in the room. You could argue he's not top 3. And that's not a shot at him. Just we've talked about how Cam Williams is probably the most freaky and physically gifted wide receiver in that room. Mylan Graham, since he transferred in, is going to be a part of that conversation. Very interested to see where Quincy Porter fits into that conversation. Jaden Greathouse is always going to be a part of that conversation. And so that's the biggest separator in the wide receiver room. That's where we get into the discussion of like skill versus like this is what we've already seen. But I'm with you. I think the sum of all of its parts, Notre Dame has elite talent. And that's the biggest piece. I think even in the running back room, I don't know. You could argue the true freshman. But to me, I don't know if there's any one individual running back that I would be like, yep, that's an elite guy. But the sum of what the rotation could be, I think makes the running back room elite. And that's how I think a lot of the skilled position groups are for Notre Dame. I'm with you completely. But another thing that you mentioned, Brian, was depth of talent. And you said the depth of talent at Notre Dame's skill position. Depth of talent overall is what we would like to see on a championship caliber and elite caliber roster. And that's something that we've talked about ad nauseum with Notre Dame's roster so far this offseason, and they have a ton of it.
Yeah, I mean, because you're not in a situation, I'll say this, other than quarterback. And the only issue at quarterback is more so experience, not talent. But other than quarterback, I don't have the same fears of if so-and-so goes down, they're screwed like there has been for most years. I don't have that same fear outside of quarterback. And again, it's not a lack of – you're not putting Pat Dillingham in the game, with all due respect, if C.J. Carr goes down. You're putting a talented kid on the field. You're just putting a very inexperienced talented kid on the field. But I don't have the same if so-and-so goes down, you're screwed as I did in the past. Or if so-and-so doesn't pan out, like we've talked about in the past, you're screwed. There isn't that same fear. In the past, you lose a starting D tackle, you're like, pfft. Now, depending on who starts, you could say, well, this guy's less experienced, but I would argue he's more talented than the guy that he's replacing. There's those arguments to be had at certain positions. In the past, you lose a Drew Tranquill or a Tavon Coney, and there's a big drop-off. You lose Julian Love in the middle of the semifinal game against Clemson, and there's a drop-off because you have to play an injured Dante Vaughn in that game. Now it's like, okay, you lose Leonard Moore, and who are you putting on the field? Jaden Sanders, Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, DJ McKinney, Christian Gray, Kari Adams, Aiden Pouncey, Chaz Smith. Like, it's a different animal than it used to be. And so when you look at – and that to me factors into when you're evaluating a roster, it's can – because here's the thing I can promise. Of all the top 10 teams that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, all 10 of them are going to have somebody go down with an injury. Like multiple somebodies. The question is, do you have the talent to sustain those dings and, bumps and bruises throughout the season, whether it's a 3-week long injury where your season is defined because you lose 2 out of 3, or it's a season long injury. You look, for example, Notre Dame in 2024. If Notre Dame didn't have a deep, talented defensive line, when Riley Mills went down against Indiana, that'd have been the end of their season. There's no way they go beat Georgia, much less Penn State, when you lose an All-American D tackle. But who are you putting on the field? You're putting Gabriel Rubio on the field, who's a really good football player, who I think would be an NFL draft pick if not for the fact that he's just never been able to stay healthy his entire career. Those are things that factor into it, Trev. And when you think of the top teams, it's like, okay, can Ruben Bain get knocked down for a game, and what happens next? Oh, you're bringing in Marquise Lightfoot? Okay, you're good. All right, those are the things that you look at, Trev, and I think that there's no doubt that Notre Dame has the kind of talent across the board to say they have elite depth. That's the one thing I will confidently say. I don't think there's a single team that has the depth of talent that Notre Dame has. It's more debatable to say, are there teams that have better starting lineups than Notre Dame? I think that's debatable. What I don't think is debatable is who has the most depth on their roster. I actually think that's Notre Dame by a pretty convincing margin.
The depth of talent in South Bend is look. I don't know if there's any other outlets out there that are getting buy, sell, hold questions of buy, sell, hold a team of all of Notre Dame's backups get over 9 wins in their regular season schedule. Now, some of that's a little bit of we're fans of the team. We obviously know a lot more about Kari Adams and Aiden Pouncey and Joey O'Brien than, say, a potentially Miami fan would. But all things on the table, if we're talking strictly talent, there is no significant drop-off in any position group outside of quarterback. And when I mean significant drop-off, that's not an inclination on Noah Grubbs or Teddy Gerard, who's coming in, or Blake Hebert. That's just they have a preseason Heisman favorite as their starting quarterback.
Right.
And that's again, not a testament to the backups. But Aeneas Williams goes down. So you put in Nolan James or Kedron Young,
right,
or Javian Osborne or Jonas Walton, even along the offensive line. Now, that one's a little bit more disparaging compared to other rooms, say the running back room, but even then, if he continues to develop, Will Black goes down, you put in potentially Grayson McHugh, depending on how much he continues to come along, who's another very highly talented kid. Gerby Lambert goes down. You put in Matty Augustine, who Notre Dame is prepping to be kind of their just sixth man outside of center. I mean, so we're talking about a team that is just absolutely loaded with talent. I'm with you completely. And it kind of goes into the conversation of limiting the areas of concern. When you have the depth of talent and when you have the high level talent within the starting lineup that Notre Dame does, you limit the areas of concern. I know a hot topic of discussion for a lot of Notre Dame fans, rightfully so, has been like the kicking game. If there's a disparaging gap in talent between like a kicker and the rest of the team, I mean, Alabama won numerous national championships with a lot of issues in the kicking game. So it's an area of concern, but not one such as quarterback, offensive line, D line, corner. And those are areas where Notre Dame is pretty short up. And that's another factor of having an elite roster.
I think the other thing too is there's a lot of people in the chat who think that Notre Dame's quarterback situation is unique, and it's not. Somebody just said, not sure Notre Dame has enough depth at quarterback. Well, does Texas? Does Ohio State? No. There's only one team that does, and I would even see that's debatable, and that's Oregon with Dylan Raiola. But I don't know that he's talented, but I don't know that I trust Dylan Raiola to lead a team to a championship. I just watched him. He couldn't lead a talented Nebraska team to a championship, and he's coming off of an injury. So this notion that if you're going to say, hey, if we're talking about the season's projections, sure. But if you're going to question that Notre Dame's roster is elite because the drop-off of quarterback, hey, welcome to 2026. And I think somebody in the chat, I think it was Raymond Harton said this, what Notre Dame had the last 2 years was unique. Teams don't have that. Having Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchie in 24, and CJ Carr in 24, having Kenny Minchie in 25 is unique. There aren't a lot of teams that have that. Ohio State, for example, has a very talented young quarterback in Taven St. Clair, who I think highly of as a talent. But does anyone really think that he's just going to come in and no doubt about it, they're not going to miss a beat at quarterback? That might happen. Heck, for Ohio State, it's happened before. Do I need to throw out the name Cardell Jones again? You know what I mean? And technically that was their third quarterback because Braxton Miller got hurt, I think in preseason, right? So JT Barrett steps in and then he gets hurt. That's rare, but they also didn't ask him to carry that team. He was a passenger on that championship bus. You know what I mean? So I think some of y'all need to take a little bit of a deep breath and realize that what Notre Dame taking a step back if CJ Carr goes down to quarterback is true for everybody. It's true for Georgia. The only team it may not be true of are teams that have a question mark at quarterback because they're going through a battle, like Alabama. I don't know if the drop-off, whoever wins the starting job, I don't know that there's a big drop-off between that guy and who comes in if he gets hurt in game one because there's not much separation between the two either, and that guy's not on the level of CJ Carr, Arch Manning, Dante Moore, Julian Sand right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Amongst playoff contenders off the top of my head, the only teams that I think that could survive a devastating injury to a starting quarterback, Alabama, LSU, maybe, and Oregon, maybe. And that just kind of depends on what your feelings are about both quarterbacks at Alabama, what your feeling is about Sam Levin, what your feeling is about Dylan Raiola. And so it's all interesting. But the other factor, Brian, like we talked about, Notre Dame limiting the amount of questions they have at key spots is another reason why we think that this is a championship caliber roster for all the points that we highlighted. It's going to be very interesting.
I want to point out something here real quick, Trev, before we go to that, and I'll let you speak on that. But response to something in the chat, we didn't say, I don't believe, you have to have a returning quarterback. We said you needed an experienced quarterback. There's a difference. Carson Beck was an experienced quarterback. He wasn't a returning quarterback. Fernando Mendoza was an experienced quarterback. He wasn't a returning quarterback. So somebody just said, does returning quarterbacks mean as much these days? No. Having an experienced quarterback does. And that was the point. We didn't say it had to be a guy that's been in the system for 3 years. That's unique to Notre Dame's case. That's unique to Ohio State and Texas's case. Oregon's case. But it's not a requirement, which is why the last couple champions had transfers of quarterbacks. So I just wanted to correct that real quick, Trev. But I'll let you address the part, Trev, that you were bringing up as we wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to being being in a spot where you're limiting areas of concern. We can look at past Notre Dame teams and say, hey, it was a pretty good quarterback. Offensive line, though, Like, think about 2016. Quarterback talent, you were fine. Offensive line talent, you were fine. You had Mike McGlinchey and Quentin Nelson on that offensive line. You had Alex Bars on that offensive line. Cornerback in 2016, obviously it took a step up in 2017 when Julian Love came on the scene. But this roster that Notre Dame has right now, they've limited the areas of concern to where now the areas of concern are, and it's reflective in what we hear in press conferences, what we see at practice. Now the areas of concern for Notre Dame is who wins the second quarterback spot. Who amongst these talented tight ends and running backs win the starting job? Who is going to be the second or third safety in the rotation? What does spring look like without Drake Bowen? I guess you go with Jaden Ausberry, a limited Madden Framo, a limited, So being in a spot where you can limit a lot of those questions is good. But that being said, Brian, there are still some remaining questions about this roster. It's not just all, to your point that you said earlier, hand him the trophy now. I'm betting the mortgage on Notre Dame going undefeated and winning the Natty and CJ Carr winning the Heisman Trophy. There are some questions, and it does start with the running back and the tight end on offense, that position room.
Because when you talk talent, we're still kind of relying with a lot of those guys on what we thought of them in high school. Aeneas, I don't think that's the case, because we've seen him on a big stage prove he can be an impact player. We've seen him run a sluggo route against a starting linebacker in the semifinals and go make a big play. We saw him actually have if you go back and look, he had a really good series on that last field goal drive of the first half against Indiana. Remember, he had that third down run that it was like third and long, and they ran a quick inside run, and he runs for the first down. I think he had 1 or 2 catches in that drive as well, had some good pass pro. So, he stepped up in that moment. Then, obviously, gets another chance against Penn State, steps up and does a great job. Next carry after the sluggo route, he runs an outside zone, busting inside the 5. Jeremiah Love scores a couple plays later, right? So, we've seen him. We saw him step on the field against Stanford this past year when Jeremiah Love got banged up and, didn't really miss a beat. He not miss a beat from Jeremiah Love, but didn't miss a beat from, he was dominating its backups all year. Well, guess what? He goes in against Stanford starters and looks just like he did against other teams' backups. Now, part of that's because Stanford's not very good, but you get the point. But with all the others, Nolan James Jr., Kedron Young, the 2 freshmen, it's basically saying, well, this is how good I think they were coming out of high school, and so I'm projecting their talent. You have to be honest about that. Same thing at tight end. I don't think you can look at what James Flanagan did last year in limited snaps and say he's going to be a star by itself. It's what he did combined with my preconceived opinion of what he was in high school is why I'm thinking he's going to be a stud. So we've got some people in the chat that aren't Notre Dame fans, daily comments, Archer, Insured by Big. Let's assume for argument's sake, none of them watched James Flanagan in high school. They're not going to go watch him and be like, well, he's a pretty good blocker. Maybe even a really good blocker. And that's it. They're not going to be like, dude, this is the next, Kyle Rudolph or the next, Troy Nicholas or whatever. Because they're going to have no frame of reference other than just, he was a pretty good blocker in some limited snaps last year. So you have to be honest about that when you're evaluating certain players. Same thing with Will Black, for example, left tackle. Everything we think about Will Black is based primarily on what we saw from him in high school. Now, he did actually look good in some mop-up minutes last year, like guard and right tackle. But the point is, there is some projection here based on what we thought they were coming out of high school. And so I think that's where you have to say, okay, could that be the difference between them being an elite offense or a really good offense? I don't think so. But it's at least worth mentioning if they don't at least, because I think if the quarterback's elite, the receivers are elite, and the offensive line's elite, you can just get away with just being good at tight end and running back. But if the receiving core is just really good but not elite, if the offensive line's just really good and not elite, and CJ Carr is kind of just a more experienced version of what he did last year, now you might suffer a little bit when you get into the postseason if your running back and tight end are not what we hope it could be. So I think that's why it's imperative to at least address that as a potential concern. when you look at it from the offense. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, Trev. When I think of my concerns, the big thing is if I'm gonna ding a roster, I can't be concerned about quarterback, your trenches, and corner. I think those are the four positions: quarterback, O-line, D-line, corner. Where if you have big question marks, you're in trouble. And I don't think we have those questions for Notre Dame. The one question I will say is it's hard to fully project just how good I think the cornerback room is going to be without knowing who's going to be where. That's the only other kind of question mark I have. But there's a level of confidence that I think they're going to be fine no matter how it shakes out. But there is a level of I wish I knew how it was going to shake out. That's a question mark.
That's also how I feel about the defensive line. You know, we use a lot of food analogies here, and it's with the defensive line room outside of Boubacar. I look at it like when you go to the store to get ingredients to make a meal, and it's like, I know when I put all of these things together, it should be good. But there's a lot of individual pieces that I need to see come together. For Jason Onye, we're, again, talking about the consistency conversation. And it's like the last half of the season, you were like really, really good. Now can you string it all together? Because up until this point, it was this. I talked about Armel Mukam earlier today. He fits that category. We're very high talent-wise on what Christopher Burgess could be, should be, will be along the interior of the defensive line. But then similar to the conversation you talked about with high school with like a James Flanagan or with Javian Osborne or Jonas Walton, that's kind of how I feel right now about Ebenezer Utade and how I feel about Rodney Dunham. With Logan Thomas, like, hey, the talent's there. You're super twitchy. You're long. But there's only so much more. There's only so much more time that I can be like, hey, he was on the field the final drive against Georgia in 2024. It's like, now we need to see more of that. So consistency is going to be the thing. Talent's not the question. But that's the other question that I have about the defensive line. Similar to your question about the cornerback room is, I know they're going to be good. The question is how good can they be? I think they're good enough to be considered an elite part of a roster, but
a very good part of an elite roster, right?
Yeah.
Like that's that. And that goes back to the original conversation is when you talk about question marks, there is a question of will the either line be elite?
Yeah.
It just, for me, it doesn't bother me if they're not, as long as they're both very good. But if one's very good, not elite, and the other one struggles, then that makes that's going to ding your roster ranking a little bit. But if they're both very good, then I think that is where you need to be. You know.
Final question too, Brian, is just the lack of production at wide receiver. We talked about that when we evaluate rosters, there is a degree of proven production. It's not the end all be all. You can't only go on proven production when you're talking about projecting of how the roster is going to shape out over the season. But there is a facet of outside of Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison, there's a lot of like the talent's going to have to take the day to get you to the point where you have now that proven production.
Yep, absolutely. I'm with you.
Brian, let's get into the next part of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And what we're going to do now.
What, Trev, can I interject here something real quick? I've got to respond to this. I'm sorry. We'll jump back into that and we'll clean this part out. But before we move on to that, I need to respond to something because this frustrates me every time the conversation comes up. Is whenever I don't think a player was a great player. And there's always these people, shade and hater and all this stuff. It's nonsense. So you can talk about Will Pauling all you want. Will Pauling was a nice player. I'm glad Notre Dame got him. And, he led the team in receiving touchdowns. Notre Dame played 5 ranked teams last year. 5. In those 5 games, Will Pauling had 9 catches for 64 yards and 1 touchdown. That's it. So when I break down the film, I'm going to give you an honest opinion. Every time. Doesn't mean I'm right, but I'm going to give you an honest opinion. If I say someone's not good, it's not shade, it's not hating, it's an evaluation. We're grown-ups here. It's an evaluation. I'm giving you an opinion, and it's not about being underutilized. Watch the film. He didn't get open, and a big chunk of his production came because he was wide open because teams were worried about all the other weapons they had. Go watch the film. He had a couple great catches last year. The touchdown catch against Boise State was a phenomenal back shoulder catch. But I could point to 3 plays in that game, 2 actually, where if he would have jogged off the line, he'd have caught 2 more touchdowns. I expect a Notre Dame receiver to make a play on a Boise State receiver. But to be considered someone that I view as a top-level player, I need you to not have 2 catches for 13 yards against Texas A&M, 2 catches for 16 yards against USC, 2 for 29 against, let me look at his 2 for 29 against Navy, and then 3 for 6 against Pitt. I don't care that he had a good game against Arkansas. Go look at the 3 catches he had against Arkansas. It's literally wide open every time, and not because of anything he did, because of the play call and because teams were focused on other guys. He's a good, solid football player. What I said in the show is there's a big difference between putting him on the field and putting Mylan Graham on the field, or Jordan Faison in the slot, or Elijah Burks, because they're more talented players. Think about it. He runs a 4.36 and had a crazy vertical jump and had over 1,000 career yards, but he's not projected to be drafted in the first 4 or 5 rounds. What does that tell you? As a fan, what does that say? That he's a really good athlete and a great kid. In 1 year, Trev, you talk to any Notre Dame player about the leaders of the team, and they will all point to Will Pauling. All of them. About the impact he had on them as a person. Listening to CJ Carr and Jordan Faison talk about them walking in the locker room and that kid's reading his Bible. I love that kid. But that doesn't change who he is as a football player. And as a football player, he was just solid. There's a big difference between what he did. Think about it. In 5 games against ranked teams, he had less receiving yards than what Jaden Greathouse had in the second half against Penn State and the second half against Ohio State in the playoffs the year before. So he is a solid player. Never said he sucked. Never said he's a bad kid. He was a solid player who did almost nothing against anybody good. He dominated average teams. So, yeah, maybe we are watching different film. I'm watching the Notre Dame film. I'm watching all 22. I'm watching a guy that doesn't get open when someone's actually guarding him. That's why almost every catch he had last year, he was wide open. It wasn't about underutilization. He's a solid football player. He's not an elite football player. So I get frustrated. You want to disagree with my evaluation? Let's have that conversation. I can be wrong. I didn't think Kyron Williams was going to be a great player at Notre Dame, and he was. He was one of the lowest ranked players I had in that class. I'll always own if I'm wrong about a player. But don't come at me with this throwing shade. Maybe we were watching different film. You tell me when. Don't say, guess who's underutilized. How? Show me the game, because I made this case in 2024 about Jaden Greathouse. When he didn't produce, people say, well, he didn't put up numbers. I'd say, look, go watch this game. Look how often he was open in this game. And I could show you film of that. I can also show you film of Will Pauling not coming off the ball hard and not getting into openings when CJ Carr wanted to throw him the ball. People say, well, CJ Carr missed him on that route. No, he was jogging out of his break. If he sprints out of his break, that ball hits him right in stride and he scores a touchdown. So I get frustrated by this. If you want to have a debate about a player, let's have it. I'm not always right. I'll never claim to always be right. But please don't come at me with the whole, I'm throwing shade, I'm a hater, anything like that. It's petty. And it doesn't actually make your point at all. It makes it look like it's personal to you, not me. Because I've given you football examples. You asked me about what I think of Will Pauling as a young man. Very different story than if you ask me what I think of Will Pauling as a football player. As a football player is just a solid player. As a young man, he's phenomenal. One of the best Notre Dame has. You don't become a captain in basically 1 semester if you're anything short of an elite human being. But that doesn't mean you're a great football player. It just means you're a great human being. So if you want to disagree with that, fine. But please come at me with something more than don't throw shade, hater, and that other silliness. Because that's an emotional argument, not a football argument. Tell me how, based on you watching film, I'm wrong. And then we can do it. I'm sorry. I get frustrated by that, Trev. I can't stand it. It's Irish Breakdown. We break down film. I'm not going to lie to you. If you want a channel to lie to you and tell you that everything is awesome, I'm assuming there's another channel out there like that. I'm going to assume. I don't know. I don't watch anybody else. But we're going to give you an honest opinion, whether we're right or whether we're wrong. And sometimes we'll be right and sometimes we'll be wrong. But it's always about football. It's not about your feelings. So, end of rant.
Well said. Brian, as we get into the next part of the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we just got done talking about what we believe Notre Dame's roster is and what makes up a championship caliber and elite type of roster. Now we're going to broaden the scope a little bit, and we're going to talk about the other teams in college football, and we're going to go through our ranking of what we believe to be as the top 10 rosters in college football. Now, quick refresher. When we broke down what makes up an elite roster, some of the essentials, it's talent, the depth of talent, being good at key areas, being good in the trenches, high quality of that talent, and having it in more than just one spot. I use the analogy of in 2009, Notre Dame had an outstanding receiving corps highlighted by their last Biletnikoff Award winner. But they went 6-6. Just because that roster had Jimmy Clausen, Golden Tate, and Michael Floyd, and Kyle Rudolph, Notre Dame as a team did not have a top 10 roster in college football that year, unfortunately. So all of those factors are kind of what we factor into our ranking. And like we do with a lot of things, we're going to snake it. We're going to go 10-1. And not to the surprise of very many people, there's a lot of similarities between mine and Brian's list. And that's kind of where we start this conversation.
Before we start this conversation, Trev, I got to say this. You got to stop bringing up 2009 because that still stings.
I know. I'm sorry.
I really thought that team was going to be good. I did. Even with Tenuta as the DC, I just man, with Michael Floyd and Golden Tate and Kyle Rudolph and Jimmy Clausen and Armando Allen and all these, I said, they're just going to be good. I'm still, I would argue that is still the most disappointing season I've ever had to sit through as a fan. And just think about how close every single loss was.
Yeah.
I mean, even the USC game, which was a 7-point game, USC kind of controlled that game. But even then, Notre Dame still came back, and Jimmy had that phenomenal pass to Golden over top of Taylor Mays for a touchdown. But you think about it, man, they were 6-6 that year, and they had an opportunity to at worst be 11-1. Because I don't count the USC game because they never really led late in that game, but they should have beat Michigan, they should have beat Navy, they should have beat Pitt, they should have beat UConn, they should have beat Stanford. I'll say this: I'll say 10-2 at worst, 9-3 at worst. You could argue maybe they still lose Stanford, maybe they still lose Pitt. Pitt outplayed them in a lot of ways. USC, but at worst, that team should have been 9-3. I think that should have been a 10-2 team. I still man, how did that freaking team go 6-6?
Yeah, I thought that 09 team was going to be what the 2015 team was. Minus the elite level of players on defense. There was no Jalen Smith on that team. There was no Kavari Russell or Cole Luke on that team. But record-wise, I thought, and even the USC game, they had an opportunity to tie it and send it into overtime at the very end. They ran that same pivot route to Kyle Rudolph that they won to win the game on the road against Purdue, and Clausen went there. Duval Kamara was wide open on a backside dig route in the back of the end zone. That hurts.
And that defense, you say they still had Harrison Smith, they still had Manti, they still had Brian Smith, they still had Cap, they still had Ian Williams, Robert Bland, Ethan Johnson, Darius Fleming, Gary Gray, Darren Walls, Kerry Neal. Man, it just that one stings. That one stings. Yeah. So I had to bring that up. I said, man, you're really trying to hurt my heart today. Just keep bringing up 2009. But it is a great point for the context of this conversation. There was a lot of elite players on that football team. They did not have an elite roster. And that's the whole point is they had elite receiving corps, elite tight end room, elite quarterback, a lot of NFL players in the secondary didn't make an elite roster. And I think that's a great example of it. I think you could argue that the 2009 team had far more star power than the 2012 team. The holes on that 09 team were significantly greater than the holes on the 2012 team. And especially in the trenches. That's the biggest difference. Notre Dame, I would put up Notre Dame's skill talent in 09 against anybody in the country in 09. Anybody. Name me a receiving core in 09 that had a better 1-2 punch than Michael Floyd and Golden Tate. Nobody did. I think Jimmy Clausen was one of the best quarterbacks in the country in 09. But it just shows you when you're not elite in the trenches, or at least even very good in the trenches, doesn't matter how much skill talent you have. And it goes back to it, and it's pertinent to this conversation because there's some teams that we're not going to have on this top 10 that you could argue have elite aspects of their team, but there's something really big missing, either a quarterback or in the trenches in a lot of cases. And that's also what I think separated a lot of these teams when Trev and I are putting our rankings together, is those are the things that when you're talking about why is this team 3 and why is this team 6, a lot of times it's going to be either quarterback or this team I viewed as being better in the trenches than that team. So I thought that was something that was fascinating. But you keep bringing up that 09, which stings a little bit, but I think that team is also a great reminder of elite talent doesn't equal elite roster. And that's what makes this 2026 Notre Dame team different. And I think it's what makes these teams that we have in the top 10 different. So let's dive into them, Trev, and we'll start off with your number 10 team, and that is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. We're going to go 10-1, and then at the end, we'll kind of get into our, who are the teams that are elite. And then, by the way, we are also, as long as you guys have questions, we're going to do a mailbag today. So get those questions in for the mailbag. Right now, we only have one. But go ahead and throw those MB. Just put an MB on there or a mailbox emoji. We'll star it, and we'll get to those at the end of this conversation. Otherwise, we'll be done after this. But it's going to be a fun conversation. And now in the chat, we want to hear your guys' thoughts about the teams we're bringing up. Where would you put them? What are your thoughts? Are we missing the boat? Let's have some fun talking in the chat here about this as well.
Yeah, my number 10 team is the Texas Tech Red Raiders, and I like a lot of things about this team. First and foremost, we talk a lot about the trenches. They return their left tackle, their center, and their right tackle. And the only offensive lineman they went and got out of the portal is Jordan Church from Louisville, and he played 500 snaps last year. Interesting wide receiving core. Koya Aiken comes back. What's Micah Hudson going to be going in year 2? But I love the Kenny Johnson pickup. I'm going back to a player that I talked about a lot in 2025. I thought Kenny Johnson was the best wide receiver that Pitt has. He's now playing in Lubbock, Texas for the Red Raiders. Very interested to see what he does. I think they're going to have one of the best backfield tandems in the Big 12 with Cameron Dickey coming back at running back. And then I think they upgraded at quarterback, getting Brendan Sorsby. Baron Morton was a solid quarterback. I think Brendan Sorsby is an upgrade. Flip over to the defensive side of the ball. Love the back end. Ben Roberts comes back at linebacker. And you could argue he had just as impactful of a postseason performance when you factor in tail end against BYU, Big 12 championship game against BYU. And look, Texas Tech didn't lose 23-0 because of their defense. Their offense was just getting eaten alive by an Oregon team that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But you could argue that Ben Roberts had just as impactful of a postseason as what Jacob Rodriguez did. So very interested to see what that's going to be. And then they also brought in Austin Romine, a very productive player from Kansas State. Their secondary remains intact with Bryce Pollock, Brendan Jordan, Amir Boyd, and then John Curry also comes back. We can talk about whether we consider a 6'3", 240-pound kid as a DB.
Who was that team a few years ago that had a defensive player that was just listed as it was FB and it standed for football player? Or was that no, that was an offensive guy. Wasn't that UVA?
Yeah.
Had a kid that they just listed as like FB.
Yep.
And they're like, does that mean fullback? No, it just means football player. He kind of does a little bit of everything. That's John Curry. He's listed as a DB. One roster lists him as, I think actually PFF lists him as a corner. He's 6'2", 235.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know what the list of kid is, but I know this, Trev. He's a really good football player.
Yes. Heck yes. And he comes back for this defense. Now, biggest question I think overall for their success is going to be, will the defensive line portal acquisitions, how are they going to pan out? I know they got the Mateen kid from Wake Forest. They picked up some other players. Will they be the same way? Will they work out the same way they did in 2025? I don't know if they went and got a David Bailey or a Romello Heights, but I do think they brought in some talent there. But when I'm evaluating talented rosters and top rosters for this upcoming season, I think where you have to start is with Texas Tech.
Yeah, and honestly, Trev, I think there's a case to be said that, and they're my 10 as well. I think there's a case to be said for Texas Tech to be higher when it's all said and done. Here's my evaluation of Texas Tech this season. I'm going to there we go. I would argue that Texas Tech this season will have better skill talent all around than they had last year. Like when I look at because you're bringing your running backs back, and I believe Quentin Joyner will be back. Right? I don't believe he transferred. Is he gone? Did he leave?
Nope. Okay. Nope, he's there.
Okay. I couldn't tell if you're like, man, like no, as in like, man, that's a sick backfield, or like, nope, you're wrong, Brian. He's not there anymore.
Brian, you're wrong. Move on. Let's talk number 9.
Just don't embarrass yourself, dude. Like you obviously talked about the 2 receivers coming back. You've got Micah Hudson, who's a former 5-star recruit who's supposed to having a good spring. And then they brought in a kid from the portal that I think has a chance to be a really good player as well, Trev. And that's Malcolm Simmons, who was at Auburn last year. Had 25 catches for 457 yards and 2 touchdowns at Auburn last year, who I think adds some value to that receiving core as well. Secondary, I think is at the very least a wash because you did lose some good players, but you have a lot coming back. They added some guys there. Linebacker, will it be as good as last year? Don't know. It's still going to be very good. Forget the comparison to last year. It's still going to be very good. The big question mark I have with Texas Tech is really about their trenches. That's where the conversation is for me. And their defensive line should still be good. I wonder how good it'll be. I like some of the kids they went out and got in the portal, Trev. We've kind of talked about, we talked a lot about this when we kind of did some different rankings. And I like the kid they got from Miami of Ohio. He's a good football player. But that doesn't mean that he's David Bailey or Romello Height. That's kind of the question I have. But even more so, the really big question mark that I have about Texas Tech is their offensive line. I think that's the thing. If you give them a different offensive line, a better, more talented offensive line, I think you can make a case that they are closer to top 5 than 10 with the rest of their roster. And I also think compared to last year, big upgrade at quarterback from a talent standpoint. Now, will he be the gamer, the winner that Baron Morton was? That remains to be seen. I mean, like people in our chat love to point out every time we talk about Brendan Sorsby, like he has yet to beat a ranked team. And that could be nothing. It could just be, yeah, of course, look who he plays for. It could also mean that's who he is. He's a reason why. So I think from will he be better from a winning and losing standpoint than Baron Morton? That's a fair question because the Baron Morton, for his lack of talent, kid was a winner. I mean, they were a very different looking team when he was out, but they're more talented at quarterback this year than they were last year. It's a very talented roster. I just wonder how good they are in the trenches on both sides of the ball, especially on offense. That's why they rank lower on this list than maybe my gut initially was thinking where they would be.
Yeah, I'm with you, especially around the quarterback conversation. It's kind of like what Indiana went with from Curtis Rourke to Fernando Mendoza. And that's not me saying that Brendan Sorsby is going to go out and win the Heisman Trophy at Texas Tech this year. It's just Curtis Rourke was a solid quarterback, the guy that they needed to kind of engineer their turnaround, similar to what Baron Morton was for Texas Tech in 2025. I just think that Brendan Sorsby unlocks a different level for this offense, similar to what Fernando Mendoza did to IU's offense last year. I'm with you completely, but we both have Texas Tech at number 10. My number 9 team, Brian, is the Alabama Crimson Tide. And this kind of starts at the quarterback position. Obviously, they're going through a battle right now. It's either Keelan Russell or Austin Mack, 2 kids that you and I both believe that is going to be an upgrade over Ty Simpson. I think they have more physical tools. With Austin Mack, he's been playing in the Ryan Grubb, Kalen DeBoer offense. Now, this is year 3 for him going into this offense, and now he's battling out for the quarterback spot. And then you and I are both very high on Keelan Russell as a prospect.
Talking about for Austin Mack?
Yes.
This is year 4.
Year 4.
Because he was a freshman at Washington in 2023.
That's right. I couldn't remember if he was a freshman at Washington in 23 or 24. I got those.
If he signed with them, right? Yeah. Because he was obviously at Alabama in 24. Kalen DeBoer came in 24. So yeah, 4th year in the system.
4th year in the system, very experienced. I think they get an upgrade at quarterback. I like the talent in their running back room. Wide receiver room is set with Ryan Williams, Latsier Brooks, who started to come onto the scene, and then they got Noah Rogers out of the transfer portal. You flip it over to the defensive side of the ball. I really like their secondary. I believe I ranked them in my top 10. Brian, I think you might have too. I think it was different spots.
Our secondaries?
Yes.
Oh, I had that Alabama secondary in the top 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense. I also had, I couldn't remember if I had them in top 5, top 10. Moral of the story, we both ranked them inside of our top 10. We think very highly of their secondary with Bray Hubbard and Keon Sabb and Xavier Brown all coming back. The reason for me that Alabama is not much higher on this list, I have a lot of questions in the trenches, and they have inexperience at linebacker with Caden Jones and QB Lee stepping up to replace some guys that they lost to the transfer portal and then guys that they lost to graduation in the NFL draft. So questions in the trenches is a big one for me for Alabama. That's why I have them at 9th.
Yep. My number 9 is Oklahoma, Trev, and I really like this Oklahoma roster. I don't think they had a top 10 roster last year. We talked about this. They were a top 10 team because of the teams they beat. I think their schedule warranted them including in the top 10, but I don't think they had a top 10 roster last year in a lot of ways. I actually do think this year that Oklahoma has a top 10 roster. They don't have an elite quarterback. That's what separates them from some other teams in the schedule. I think John Mateer is going to be a really good quarterback this year in that second tier of top quarterbacks. You know, like there's the elite group that has the Carrs, the Moores, the Mannings, the Sayans, the Mensahs, guys like that. And then there's that second tier guys. And I kind of put Mateer in the top group of that second group. Still a very good quarterback, and he's a great fit for the system that Ben Arbuckle runs. If he can stay healthy, he's really good there. They bring back all their running backs. I'm even more confident they're going to get the most out of that running back talent. Torrey Blaylock, the big Robinson kid. They bring in a really good freshman because they now have, in my opinion, the best running back coach in the business coaching them. So there's more confidence they're going to get the most out of that talent. And I really like what Oklahoma did at receiver. Obviously, bringing back Isaiah Satanga is big. He's a very talented player. But then they got to the portal. They get Terrell Harris. We talked about him in a show the other day, Trev, when we were talking about the teams rising, descending. That was one of the big losses for UVA, was losing Terrell Harris. He's going to Oklahoma. Had 59 catches for 847 yards, 5 TDs last year. They got Parker Livingston out of the portal. Texas passed on him. I think that was a mistake. As a true freshman last year, he had 29 catches, 516 yards, 6 touchdowns as a true freshman in that league. I understand why they didn't prioritize him as much. They wanted to go get a Cam Coleman, that type of guy. I'd say keep them all. But now, what your loss is Oklahoma's gain. And the other thing that has me, I think their secondary is not as good as Bama's, but it's still good. It's experienced. The thing that has Oklahoma in the top 10 for me, on top of the health of John Mateer, is I expect their line play to be much better this year on both sides of the ball. Their D-line was very good last year, and even with some losses, I still expect their front seven to be very good. They lost 2 of their best defensive linemen. They lost Owen Heineke at linebacker, but they still bring back Kip Lewis. They have plenty of talent at linebacker. They still have plenty of talent coming back on the D-line. I think they're just going to kind of reload there. Their offensive line was a work in progress last year. It reminds me a lot of Miami's 24 offensive line. Maybe not as talented. I don't know that there's a Francis Maunoa in the Oklahoma offensive line, but remember how Miami was in 24, Trev? It was like they've got talent, but they just can't put it all together. But that time together, you had one of the better O-line coaches in the business, and Alex Maribel coaching them up. You kind of got that center to solidify it, and eventually the talent turned into production. That's how I feel about Oklahoma, without having a Maunoa, but 5 guys that come. You had 4 returning starters. Your newcomers, an experienced player to your offensive line. A Marion Harris, who came from Arkansas, was a solid player to Arkansas, but you've got Bill Bedenbaugh coaching them. I think that's the separator for me. And now, if I'm right about their offensive line, that's what makes them a more dangerous team, because their offensive line kept their skill talent from being more productive last year. If we're right about the offensive line, I think that's a thing that could really make this a jump for Oklahoma from an overall talent standpoint, because you can't be an elite roster if you don't have a really good offensive line. Last year, their offensive line was very average, just like Miami's was in 24. But they brought everybody back. They were coached well, and they took that big jump in 25. I see a similar jump for Oklahoma's offensive line in 26.
I'm with you. I'm also very high on Oklahoma's roster. I think they're one of the more underrated teams. That's why I have them at number 8. on my list. And look, they're being underrated by a lot of different places. And it's not just within the, the beat writing sphere. Our friends over at FanDuel also have them. They have like the 7th best odds to just win their conference. They have the 14th best odds to win the national championship. But I think that they have a top 10 roster in college football. The biggest separator for me, because I echo a lot of the same points that Brian said about Oklahoma, so I don't want to harp on it too much. But the biggest separator between them and Alabama for me is the trenches. I have more confidence in Oklahoma in the trenches this season than what I do with Alabama. When I look at what Oklahoma has coming back and the talent that they have players who have started games or just flat out returning starters at left tackle, left guard, center, and right tackle. Then I like a lot of what they bring back on the defensive line. Taylor Weens started at defensive end last year. Adebaware played 283 snaps. Stone played 454. Then Jackson played 308. I like that Mateer comes back at quarterback. Xavier Robinson led the team in yards per carry last year, and that was with obviously players over like 10 carries, 10, 20 carries, because Satengda had like 4 carries for like 60 yards last year on like reverses, things like that. So I like a lot of what they bring back. I echo a lot of the same things that Brian did about their portal pickups with Trell Harris. Cortland Guillory is a name that I think people need to be on the lookout for in their secondary. I put him in that next wave of up-and-coming quarterbacks, like with Ellis Robinson at Georgia, Devin Sanchez at Ohio State. I think Cortland Guillory can be a dude, and they have that foundation with the Bowen brothers on the back end of their defense that I really like as well. So for a lot of those reasons and what Brian said, I put Oklahoma at 8.
Yeah, but we have the same, Trev, 9 and 8. We just have them flipped, and it was close. I was kind of back and forth on where I was going to have Alabama and Oklahoma. I initially had Oklahoma 8 and Alabama 9, but as I kind of did a second go through of the rosters, here's a couple things that were separators for me, Trev. Obviously, we agree on the quarterback, unproven but talented no matter who steps in. I think eventually Keelan Russell's the guy. I don't know if he'll be the guy in game 1, but I think eventually he's going to be the guy. Their running back talent is good, not as good as Oklahoma's. I think their receiving talent is on the same level as Oklahoma's. I think Oklahoma has more experience at receiver. Alabama has more God-given talent at receiver. It's a bit of a wash. Defensive line, I think Alabama's got more talent. Linebacker, I think they have more talent. Oklahoma has a little bit more proven production at linebacker, and I think the secondary is a pretty big difference. I think Oklahoma has a really good secondary. I think Bama has an elite secondary.
Agreed.
The difference for me is I really like Alabama's offensive line this year if it's coached well. We're just talking talent today. We're not talking coaching. We're not talking will they run the ball enough, all that kind of thing. Because I would argue that you can make a case that Oklahoma should be ranked higher in the preseason ranking for the things that we always discuss. Will they run the ball? Will they be physical? Will they do this? That's not what we're talking about today. Today, we're just talking talent. I really like this Alabama offensive line. They got a lot of guys coming back. I think they lost some players who have talent but don't necessarily have a lot of heart. And that's a big difference for me because, Trev, you and I talk about this all the time. Sometimes it can be a little bit of an addition by subtraction, and I think Alabama went through a little bit of that this past season. And I look at their offensive line. I really like the Jackson Lloyd kid. I think he's talented. I like the Javen James kid they got from Mississippi State out of the portal. Obviously you've got Michael Carroll's going to start. Now, the question is where? Because there's some talk that Michael Carroll may move inside to guard. He may stay at tackle and somebody else. They got about 7 or 8 really good football players battling for starting lineup positions. I think they got more athletic on the offensive line, which helps their system. And I think they're a little bit more I don't know that you could argue that their quote-unquote talent is better, but I think they got better football players. Because Caden Proctor is a talented player. I don't think he's as talented as people make him out to be, but he's a talented player. I just don't know that he's a great football player. And that's the thing for me is I think that the talent on the line I like a lot better this year than I liked last year. Will they use it? That'll be a different conversation. We'll have that conversation when we talk about our preseason top 25 and we do our SEC predictions. But just from a pure talent standpoint, Alabama's roster is not as good as it used to be. That's why they're 8, not 1, 2, or 3. But this is still a talented football team. Like, make no mistake, it's still a talented football team. They weren't a very good football team last year. It wasn't because of their talent. It was because their talent wasn't coached well. They had no discipline. They weren't physical. All things that are about how the program is run. They had a top 10 roster. Is it as good as Notre Dame's roster? No. Is it a top 10 roster? Absolutely. I would argue that in some ways this year their roster's not as talented. It's not as talented as a receiver as it was last year, but it's still pretty talented. It's the line play to me, Trev, that I really like when you look at some of the new additions, but then also getting rid of some very undisciplined football players from last year's team. I'm not talking about LT Overton or Tim Keenan. The other thing too about last year's team is Tim Keenan was just never really fully healthy. And I don't know that LT Overton was always healthy either. And that hurt their play of their line. When Tim Keenan didn't play, they were a very different looking defensive line than what they were. Now, at least you have an offseason to prepare for not having Tim Keenan. Not he gets hurt in camp. And there's still plenty of talent left on that Alabama defensive line. So that's why I have Alabama 8.
I like it. Talking about my number 7 team, I'm sticking in the SEC, and I'm going with the Georgia Bulldogs. And this has been a polarizing topic for some people when it comes to talking about the talent. Is this roster going into 2026 what it was in 21 or 22? No, I don't think that it is. But do I still think it's top 10 in the country? Yeah, I do. I like their backfield as a whole. I like Gunnar Stockton at quarterback. Look, Georgia's had exits in the playoffs in, I think, the first games that they've played in each of the last 2 years. It's not been because of Gunnar Stockton. They didn't lose to Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl because of Gunnar Stockton. They didn't lose to Ole Miss when they played in the quarterfinals because of Gunnar Stockton. So I like that. He comes back. I like their running back tandem, Frazier and Bowens. Bowens showed me something a little bit last year against Alabama, even in the loss. He was a hard runner, man. I like that compliment. And then Lawson Lucky's back at tight end.
He was part of the reason they were in that game, Trev. They could not stop him.
Didn't want anything to do with him.
And if anything, it's like, why didn't you give him the ball more inside the 10-yard line?
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah. With you completely. So I like him that he comes back. He's an underrated running back in the SEC. I like the core is what I'm getting to for Georgia's offense. Stockton's back at quarterback, Frazier and Bowens back at running back, Lawson Lucky at tight end. They bring back 3 returning starters on the offensive line, and Ernest Green, Drew Bobo, and Dontrell Glover. And then Juan Gasson played 496 snaps last year. He's going to be stepping into the starting lineup, but he played routinely throughout the season. Defensively, I like a lot of the talent on the back end. Raylan Wilson and Chris Kohler back at linebacker. Ellis Robinson, I mentioned, he's another one of those cornerbacks that's kind of one of those up-and-coming guys. Like after that generation of like the Leonard Moores leave or the Jermaine Matthews leave, I think he's going to be that next wave of talented corners. And then KJ Bolden is one of, if not the best safety returning in the country. He's in that conversation. Now, here's the questions that I have about Georgia. I have questions about their overall playmaking ability at wide receiver. You know, London Humphreys comes back. They got Isaiah Canyon out of the portal from Georgia Tech. Is it one of those guys, or is it a younger talent? Taylon Taylor, a name that Notre Dame fans are very familiar with. Does he take that next step going into his redshirt freshman, maybe sophomore season? I'm not sure where he is eligibility-wise. But does he make that next step and become a big playmaker for their offense? To some of the better Georgia teams that they've had, yes, they've been stout in the trenches. They've been great on defense. But they've had playmaking ability on the outside in some of the better teams that they've had. Think back to George Pickens, A.D. Mitchell, Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey. Can any of those receivers be that? Maybe. Or is it a conversation like what we're having with Notre Dame where the sum of its parts make it an elite receiving core or a championship caliber receiving core? Then the other question I have about Georgia is who steps up along that defensive line? They can't repeat how they started and basically went through the first 7 games of their regular season in 2025 where they're just not creating negative plays or not getting pressure on the quarterback. Who steps up on the D-line? But when I look at this roster as a whole, I think it's a top 10 unit, so I have Georgia at number 7.
My number 7, Trev, is the Indiana Hoosiers. I still think this is a very talented roster. There's some areas they're not as good as they were last year. They won't be as good at receiver this year as they were last year. They're still going to be very good, though. There's nowhere, in my opinion, that they take a step back from the standpoint of they were really good, now they're average. I think they're not going to be as good at quarterback this year as they were last year. They're still going to be good. And when I look at this Indiana roster, that's really where it comes down to for me is this is still a very good team, and they're going to still be very good in the trenches. You know, obviously you lose Fernando Mendoza. You still have a good quarterback. I think that's where that really to me, and I'm a big Josh Hoover fan. You know that, Trev. I like him as a college quarterback, but he's in a different level than the other teams ahead of him. There's a big drop-off there from him compared to other teams, and that's really one of the things that drags this grade down for me. And if he was still thrown to Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper, I'd maybe have a little bit of a different conversation. I like Nick Marsh. He's a very good football player. I don't think he's as good as Elijah Sherrod or Omar Cooper. He's not quite there. I think Charlie Becker's a very good player, but Charlie Becker's a great complement to those other two guys. I don't know. We'll find out this year if he can be like a one. Tyler Morris is a nice player. Shaz Preston is a solid player. I don't know if they're as good there, but I love their offensive line. They're actually, if we're just talking talent, not experience and toughness and leadership, they're more talented on the offensive line this year than they were last year, in my opinion. I think Ademola Ajani and Joe Bruner are more talented than the guys they lost in Khalil Benson and Pat Coogan. Now, Pat Coogan didn't play great football last year because of he's an elite for day 1, day 2 draft pick talent. He's a great kid. He's a warrior. He's a leader. He's tough. All those things. He's smart. All those things. Well, now they're just going to move Bray Lynch into center, who I think is more physically talented than Pat Coogan. You bring in Joe Bruner from Wisconsin, who was an all Big Ten player last year. And then you've got a Johnny stepping into tackles. And then, of course, Carter Smith's back. Drew Evans is back. So I think in the trenches, they're still very good. They bring both of their starting defensive tackles back, who were very good players last year. You went to the portal for depth there. Their depth is a little less proven. And then defensive end, you lost 2 really good football players, actually 3 really good football players in the D-line from last year. You lose Stephen Daly, you lose Mikael Kamara, and then Kellen Wyatt was one of their good reserves. But you went into the portal. You got Toby Osun Sanmi. You got Chidi Obiazer. And then, of course, you get Josh Burnham out of the portal. I think you can make a case athletically they're more gifted defensive end this year than they were last year. Now, are they as tough? Are they as physical? That's the question. But talent-wise, they take no steps back on the defensive line, in my opinion. And they lose Aiden Fisher, but I think what you'll see from them is more nickel this year than at more 3 linebacker sets, because I think one of the great things that Bryant Haynes did last year is, look, 3 of our best players on defense are linebackers. Obviously, Aiden Fisher, Elijah Hardy, but then also Isaiah Jones. So they did a lot more 3 linebacker stuff last year. And then, of course, when they'd go nickel, they'd rotate those guys. I think we might see a little bit more nickel this year. Aiden Fisher's gone, but I think Isaiah Jones and Elijah Hardy are still an outstanding 1-2 punch at linebacker. Secondary-wise, you lose D'Angelo Pons. He's a heck of a player, but you bring back Jamari Sharp, who I like. You bring back Rylan Gandy, who was a good player for you last year. Byron Baldwin was a good player for you last year. And then you go out in the portal, and you get A.J. Harris, who's been part of a Penn State team that played in the semifinals. He wasn't the one getting smoked by Jaden Greathouse in that game, you know what I mean? And then, of course, Amari Farrell comes back. He's a really good football player as well. Preston Zachman is an interesting player. I liked him at Wisconsin. I'm curious to see how he fits into this defense. But he's still a talented football player. I mean, you see it, Trev. That's still a really talented roster. And I think people ready to just kind of write Indiana off are going to be very disappointed when they find out that Indiana is still a really good football team this year. Will they be as good as last year? No, for 2 reasons. One, their schedule's a lot harder this year in the regular season than it was last year. And number 2, I do think there is a drop-off at quarterback, and you're losing some of those kids, those JMU kids that were with Cignetti from the beginning. Aiden Fishers, the Keelan Blacks, you talk about D'Angelo Pons, Mikael Kamara, some of those guys that were really with him, that core is gone. I think there's going to be a little bit of a dip there, but the dip is, okay, they're not the best team in the country. They're still a top 6 to 7, 8 team in the country. That's the difference. They're still going to be a factor. They're still going to be a team you're like, that's going to be tough out in the playoffs if you get them. There's no doubt. This will be a better team than what they were in 2024.
I echo a lot of the same things that you say about Indiana. That's why they're my number 6 team. When I look at them, they're getting too much of they get filed too much into the look what they've lost conversation. Some of that's true. And you can paint it any way that you want to. They lost the majority of their receiving core. They lost their Heisman winning quarterback. They lost, their starting running back duo. And I understand all those things. But especially when we're talking about talent and what makes an elite roster, I'm with you. Echo everything that you say about the offensive line. The talent that they brought in the portal, I think, is really, really solid. Josh Hoover's a talented kid. Turbo Richard's a talented kid. Nick Marsh on offense. And then on defense, you got Josh Burnham, you got Toby Osunsanmi, and then I like the A.J. Harris pickup as well. But then they also return key players on both sides of the ball. We talked about Charlie Becker and the offensive line, Tyreek Tucker, Mario Landino, Elijah Hardy, Amari Farrell, and Rylan Gandy on defense. The biggest question that I have for Indiana is just how is the roster talented enough to replace the amount of star power that they lost, even outside of the quarterback conversation? I'm thinking about D'Angelo Pons, Mikhail Kamara, Omar Cooper Jr., their running back duo with Roman Hemby and Kalen Black. If they're able to answer those questions, Indiana could start to creep their way up on this list for me. But right now I have them at 6. This isn't necessarily like a ceiling versus floor debate. I think the talent's there. That's why I have them basically smack dab almost in the middle of my top 10. But there are some things that I need to see play out for them to be higher than any of the other teams that I have in my top 5.
I'm a little bit higher on Georgia this year, Trev, I think, than you are. I do think there's a bit of a difference this year between 7 and 6. I do like this Georgia team. I have some of the same questions you have, but as I study Georgia, I think I'm a little bit higher in some other areas than maybe I was last year as well. Agree with you on the running back room, though. It's a really good running back room. They got Cash Jones comes back, who's kind of like their version of like Aeneas Williams from 2024. We remember the touchdown catch that he had. You bring in Dante Dowdle, who's literally played for a different team every year of his college career, which I hate, but hey, look, he's a guy that's played. They've got depth there. The question for me for their offense isn't so much receiver, because I don't know that they need elite receivers, just how they play. I do like getting Isaiah Canyon. I think it was a very good pickup. London Humphreys is a good football player. CJ Wiley's a solid football player. The White Helton kid's a solid football player. I think they fit what they do well. Like Zechariah Branch is a 4.3 guy, and he averaged 10.0 yards per catch last year and only had 4 carries for 7 yards. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's great to have that talent, but do you use it? And that's kind of and I think Isaiah Canyon's more talented than Noah Thomas. Defensively, they're not what they used to be on the D line. That's what you and I keep talking about. They're not what they used to be. They're not what they used to be. But if you take away what they used to be and just look at what they are, this is still a good defensive line. This is still a talented front 7, and they're talented a linebacker. What gives them a boost for me is, number one, I think, I have questions about their offensive line coaching. I think their talent is going to be a little better this year. A lot more experience. There's some talented players. I think Juan Gasson has talent. I think Ernest Green has talent. I think he's kind of ready to have a breakout year now that he's got a couple years of starting under his belt. But the other one for me is, I think that this is going to be their best secondary in years from a talent standpoint. The one thing that you and I have really dragged Georgia for the last couple of years is their secondary was incredibly overrated. Incredibly overrated. And it's not this year. And that's something that boosts their roster a little bit overall for me, and the experience that Gunnar Stockton has. We now know who he is. It's not what we think he can be. And that's a difference.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's fair. I'm with you. Let's jump into the top 5 here, Brian. And coming in at my 5th spot, I have the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, let's get some of the obvious ones out of the way. They have a preseason Heisman hopeful at quarterback. They have the best wide receiver in college football. They have a solid running back, a good running back in Bo Jackson. Very excited to see what he can do in his second year in the starting lineup. I like the experience in the trenches, especially on offensive line. More so on the offensive line. I'll talk about defensive line here in a second. But Austin Sareveld comes back. Luke Montgomery comes back. Carson Hinsman comes back. Phillip Daniels comes back. So I like what they bring back in the trenches on the offensive side of the ball. You have key pieces returning in the secondary. Jalen McClain comes back. Devin Sanchez comes back, who I am very high on. I predicted him to be my Big 12 Defensive Rookie of the Year last year. Then Jermaine Matthews also returns for his second year in the starting lineup. I think he's going to be a dude this year. Biggest thing to unlocking the full potential of their secondary is if Terry Moore can return to his 2024 form. I think that's what takes this secondary to being really, really, really good to an elite secondary, that along with Devin Sanchez coming along. Biggest questions that I have about Ohio State. Defensively, I don't love their front 7. I think Kenyatta Jackson has to take a jump. Can he be what Caden Curry was to that edge of the defense was last year? Can he be what JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer was in 2024? I'm not sure. He has the physical tools to do that. That's why Ohio State's in my top 5. I mean, physically, he's a freak. Now it's just about taking that next step as a football player. Along the linebacking core, I just think even if they play to their potential, you're taking a step back at linebacker.
Talent-wise, Trev, there's no unit that takes a bigger talent step back.
Yeah.
And that's not even fair to the kids that are going to play. They're really good players. You're talking about 2 of the 5 best talents in the draft.
Absolutely.
I mean, everyone that I know that has any remote decent ability as a talent evaluator, that I know. Now, again, there may be people that don't, and I just haven't seen it. So if somebody doesn't have them in the top 5, oh, Driscoll said you suck. No, I'm just saying the ones that I've seen of the people I respect, they all have the 2 Ohio State linebackers in the top 5 of the NFL draft of just talent. So if you have 2 kids that are borderline first-round picks, that's a big step back from what you had last year when you had 2 literal top 5 caliber draft picks, a linebacker. There's, there's nobody that's even close.
No, it's a very similar conversation to what Notre Dame's losing at the running back spot. You can have really good guys, but when Notre Dame is up in contention to having 2 first-round running backs and being the first team to do it since Felix Jones and Darren McFadden, whoever steps up next, there's going to be a step back if you're looking at it objectively. And that's where I kind of think Ohio State's linebacker room falls into. I like Riley Pettyjohn and Peyton Pierce. I think they're going to be good football players. They're going into year 2 of the Matt Patricia defense. They just athletically, talent-wise, they just don't have the ceiling of what Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles did. And then the last question I have for them on the defensive trenches, I like a lot of the talent that they have there, but will the Alabama transfers be who they hoped they would be? And Quay Rousseau and James Smith. I think those are another big question that I have for them. But talent-wise, this is still a top 5 roster. They have a lot of star power. They fit a lot of the categories that we talked about. Limiting questions at key spots, quarterback, offensive line, corner especially kind of take that day. And then when you have star power like what Jeremiah Smith brings to the table, that certainly doesn't hurt. So I have Ohio State at 5th.
Yep, agree. My number 5, Trev, is the Miami Hurricanes. There was a to me, there's a difference between like top 4 and everybody else, slight difference. And then I kind of had 4 and 5 and 6, very close. Miami's 5 for me. You could make a case they're higher. I know you will actually make one here soon, but I still very much like this Miami roster. I think this is a talented team. I think in some areas, Miami's going to be more talented than they were last year. It's just, well, let me explain those first. Here's some areas. I actually think Miami's more talented at quarterback this year. Just from a depth standpoint, because obviously Luke Nichols now a year older, and he'll be better. I think that Darian Mensah's a little bit more physically gifted than Carson Beck for Miami's offense. I think he's a better physical fit for what they like to do. There's a reason why the offense was so good in 2024 and not as good in 2025. And it's not just they lost all those receivers because they had still talent there. Their offensive line was better. They were better, in my opinion, or they were just as good at running back after losing Damian Martinez because of the guys they added and more experience. A lot of it had to do with Carson Beck. It's just not that kind of gunslinger that Miami likes a quarterback, and I think Darian Mensah is. Cam Ward was. So you could argue whether he's a better pro prospect or not. I think for fitting the Miami offense, I think he fits the Miami offense better. As good as they were at receiver last year, I think they're significantly better than they were. I think they're actually more talented this year at receiver than they were 2 years ago. With all due respect to the kids they had, I think Malachi Toney's a stud. He proved it last year. Cooper Barcotti is a kid that had 1,000 yards in the same league last year. He knows this quarterback. Vendravius Jacobs is a kid that transferred in. He's a talented player. He's the one from South Carolina. Then they got Cam Vaughn from West Virginia, who's a good football player. Plus Josh Moore returns. They are loaded at wide receiver. I think this is one of the 3 or 4. Let's just be charitable. They're one of the 5 best receiving corps in the country, in my opinion, coming back. We'll debate at another time down the road whether they're 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. I'm not trying to have that conversation right now. I think what we can all agree on is that they're top 5. Then you look on the other side of the ball. We talk about skill talent. I don't think they have elite skill talent in the back end of their defense, but they're really good across the board. I don't think any of their DBs are elite players. With all due respect to O.J. Frederico, I think is a very good player. Zechariah Poise is a really good player. Xavier Lucas is a really good player. There's no Leonard Moore in their secondary. I don't even think there's a Tate Johnson in their secondary. But what I like about their secondary is there's also no holes. And some of the issues that they had last year, when Ethan O'Connor would have trouble at times, Poyser would have trouble at times, a lot of it had to do with first year in the system. And it would be like technical mistakes. It would be they were a couple yards away from where they probably should have been at the snap. Things that as the season went on, they got better and better and better of being in the right place. And that's why their defense played so well down the stretch compared to where they were in the middle of the year when they were getting beat by SMU, they were getting beat by Louisville, teams like that. Later in the year, as their secondary kind of had a better, even the Notre Dame game, what was the play that brought Notre Dame back? It was a blown coverage with Eli Raridan running wide open down the field. They're not giving up that type of play in November, in December. So I think that helped them a lot. They're talented at linebacker, but they're not elite at linebacker. I think their defense overall, their defensive talent, isn't quite as good as it was last year, but it's still very good. And I think their defensive line is still going to be very good. It'll be different, though. Last year, they had big physical power players. This year, they're more about speed and athleticism. And that's a question I'm going to have about Miami as a team. Will they be as good stopping the run this year as they were last year? And I think I don't know if it was Daily Comments or somebody else brought that up when we were talking about teams last week. But I think they're still going to be every bit as dynamic getting after the quarterback. They're very talented. And I think that's a place where I look at it and say, hey, I think this is still a very talented team. Same thing with the offensive line. They're not going to be as talented at right tackle this year as they were last year, Trev. But from a talent standpoint, I think they're going to be more talented on the offensive line because Jackson Cantwell's a true freshman, but he's very talented. Samson Okunlola, with all due respect to the guards they had last year, will be their most talented player at guard. Will he be as good of a player? That's the question mark with Miami. But from a pure talent standpoint, I think they're there. Ryan Rodriguez is a kid that probably would have started at center for them last year. Had he not got hurt the year before, I don't think they would have needed to go to the portal to get James Brockermeyer. I think they just would have moved Ryan Rodriguez inside to begin with. So I still think there's a lot of talent here. They're less experienced at certain spots, but I think overall this is a very talented Miami team still. And they're going to look different this year. They're not going to be as trench dominant this year as they were last year, but they're going to be much more of a pain in the butt for people to defend on the perimeter. And that's the difference from Miami. But overall, still a top 5 team.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have Miami as my number 4 team. And for a lot of the reasons that you said, when we're talking talent, they had a really good portal session. They bring in Darian Mensah, Cooper Barcotti. I think that Vandravius Jacobs is a very sneaky good portal pickup. And then obviously you're pairing all of them with Malachi Toney. I think they have the best running back duo in the ACC with Mark Fletcher and Shamar Brown coming back. You could argue that they have one of, if not the top running back duo returning in the country. They certainly do, I believe, on Notre Dame's regular season schedule. Now, you also look at the defensive side of the ball. They return their interior defensive line with Ahmed Moten and Justin Scott coming back. You bring in Damon Wilson to replace the Mesidor Bain production. Mohamed Torres back at linebacker for his 19th year of college football. The secondary remains intact like what we talked about. So there's a lot of things that I like, and I won't harp too much on it because, Brian, you just got done talking about why they were your number 5 team. Here's the questions that I have about Miami. Depth is a concern. If we were straight up just talking about talent and the starting lineup, you could make the case that Miami could be higher on this list. I do. But depth is a factor of having a top roster. And the depth, I have a lot of questions about Miami's depth across the board. I'm not going to get into the quarterback discussion because like we highlighted earlier in the show, you could have that about Notre Dame. You could have that about Texas, Ohio State. So there's a lot of teams. So quarterback aside, can't really suffer a lot of injuries in the trenches. If Damon Wilson gets hurt, the outlook of your defensive end position looks a heck of a lot different than what it does with him in the starting lineup. I like a lot of their secondary. You can't really afford for a guy like O.J. Frederick or Zechariah Poyser to get hurt. So those are some of the things that I have major questions about Miami. That's why they're not higher. But overall, especially amongst the starting lineup, this is a very talented top 5 roster in the country. Then the other piece too was, will their offensive line step up? Like the talent there. So that's why they're still in the top 5 for me. And then Marquise Lightfoot, all the talent in the world, going to have to make sure he takes that next jump. But that's why I have Miami as my number 4.
I think the depth that's part of the reason I had them 5 is in the trenches. They're an injury away in their starting lineup from being in really big trouble. Same at tackle on offense. Where Notre Dame loses a tackle, they've got Matty Augustine, Styles Prescott, even a Grayson McHugh. Much greater concern, in my opinion, when I look at Miami. That's something that drags them down, and that's honestly something, Trev, that made me want to drop them initially below Georgia and Indiana. The reason that I couldn't is that skill talent on offense is just really good. You know what I mean? And so then I said, okay, well, I think Georgia has an elite secondary, and I think Miami has an elite receiving core. So which other side is better? And I like Miami's secondary more than I like Georgia's offensive skill players. That's what a big separator was for me when I was looking at the conversation. So that's kind of where I view that one. My number 4, Trev, is the Texas Longhorns. And I think this might surprise some people because my gut coming into this evaluation was that Texas was in the top 3 for me. Like, no-brainer top 3. But and let me explain why my gut was that way and why they're here. When you look at Texas, I think they have one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and Arch Manning. I think he's a big-time quarterback. He's a top 5 coming back quarterback. I think at running back, I think they're very talented at running back. Now, it's going to be very different at quarterback, but running back, I would argue that they're more talented at running back this year than they were last year. I would argue that Raleek Brown and Hollywood Smothers and James Simon, who's now going to be a redshirt freshman, who I liked coming out of high school, kid Notre Dame offered, is more talented than Trey Wisner and the guys that they kind of let walk, if we're being honest. Receiver talent, they're a lot more talented at receiver this year than they were last year. Ryan Wingo's a year older. Emmett Mosley's going into year 2 in the system, and he's healthy. And then Cam Coleman's a freaky talent, And so I think they're really good there. I think their defensive line will be better than it was last year. I like the talent more. I think that some of the players they got last year were a year away from being what people thought they were going to be. Murad Watson. You've got some, Lance Jackson was a freshman last year. He now goes into year 2. Obviously, Colin Simmons is now a junior. He's going to have even more grown man strength. He might be the best defensive end in all of college football. Getting Hero Kanu is now year 2 in the system. He had a really solid year last year. Ian Jeffrard is there from Arkansas, the big 380-pound kid. You've got Murad Watson, Alex January, and they're great depth in the in the defensive tackle. I think they're more talented there. They had Anthony Hill. Losing Anthony Hill linebacker is a big blow. But you're able to go to the portal and get Rasheem Biles. So forget comparing it to last year. I don't think Rasheem Biles is as good as Anthony Hill, but just look at the talent, and it's still very talented. And then you bring in Tyler Atkinson, and then the secondary, same kind of thing. I think their secondary is an area that takes a step back talent-wise from last year. Losing Malik Muhammad and Michael Taff and Jalen Gilbo, but it still has good talent. But that's an area that drags Texas down for me. They're a lot different there than the other teams that I'm going to compare. Here's the other final piece to it to me. I have much more concerns about their offensive line than I do the teams in front of them, than I do about Notre Dame, Oregon, or Ohio State. So when you have major question marks in the secondary, as far as, again, comparing yourself to other elite teams, and your offensive line is still a concern, not just how are you coached, but talent, that's what separates it. That's what dropped Texas out of the top 3. Because if I'm just going off of my gut, Trevin, we just quickly threw this ranking together, they would have been in my top 3. When I really dive into it, that's what separates those really good rosters for me and why I dropped Texas down to 4.
No, I think that's fair. I had my top 5 was all very, very close. I mean, if I'm being honest with you, and I know it's going to come off as a personal bias, and fans of other teams might take it that way, and that's fine. But my 2 through 5 was very, very close, and each one of my teams in 2 through 5 had a case to be at 2, 3, 4, and 5. Where I landed with Texas at my number 3 spot over Miami and Ohio State, I look at what they bring back, and there's a lot of similarities between them. Arch is a preseason Heisman hopeful, as is Darian Mensah, as is Julian Sain. I like what they bring back along the offensive line. They bring back their left tackle, their right tackle, and their center, Connor Robertson, excuse me. Question is how much higher do they go up? I think they have an argument for the best wide receiver core in the SEC with Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo, Emmett Mosley, Dalen McCutcheon from a talent standpoint. Love the Hollywood Smothers pickup. I do think Colin Simmons is the best edge rusher in the country, like you alluded to earlier, Brian. I mean, he is just that dude's a freak. And now he's no longer kind of that young kid. He's entering that, okay, he's a junior in college. He's now an upperclassman. He's somebody that I think really, really turns it on this year, even more so than what he did. Love the Rasheem Biles pickup. I like the interior of their defensive line with Hero Kanu, a lot of the other players that you mentioned, Murad Watson. If they can get more out of Ian Gefford, I think that's going to be huge. Can he be more than just a plugger? Can they develop his game more than what they did at Arkansas? I'm hoping that they do, but we're not talking about coaching right now. Just from a talent standpoint, I like the pickup. I'm with you about the secondary. I am. Because they've had a lot of impactful losses in terms of talent and production over the last 2 seasons. They lost Jahdae Barron and Andrew Makuba in 2024, and they followed that up with losing Malik Muhammad and Michael Taff after 2025. Are Jelani McDonald and Grayson Littleton going to be able to step up enough to where they can make that big of an impact? I'm not sure. But overall, when you look at the sum of all of its parts, I still think that Texas is a top 3 roster in the country. But man, like I said before, 2 through 5 is exceptionally close.
Yeah. You're nitpicking. You have to figure out what's more important to you. What's better? What are the gaps between, Texas is not as good as this team here and here, but are they even significantly better in these other areas?
Yep.
Right. I think those are all things that you have to look at when you're making these decisions. My number 3 is Ohio State, Trev. And I know this is going to make Archer very happy. I would not have had Ohio State this high. I actually, when I put together my initial gut list, I had Ohio State 5. I also had them behind Miami in my, because what I did was I just kind of put like, okay, here's what I think the top 10 is going to be. And then you do the research, you break it down, you come up with all the data, and then you move it around. And Ohio State, I moved up. And there's a couple reasons why. Is I stopped comparing Ohio State to what they were a few years ago and just looked at what they are compared to everybody else. And their receiving core is not as good as it used to be. It's still really good. You know what I mean? Like that was part of me. He's like, Ohio State's taking a step back because they've got Jeremiah Smith, but they used to have a Jeremiah Smith and a Emeka Egbuka and a Cardinal Tate. And now it's just him and some freshmen. Brandon Inniss isn't that guy. But then you say, okay, but how does that stack up to the rest of the college football? Not what Ohio State was 2 years ago. Like it's still a really, really good top level receiving core. You look at the running back room this year, Trev, and look, their receiving core is not terrible. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying like when it's just not what it's been. And then you look at the running back room and I compare that to what it's been. I think it's going to be better this year than it was last year. I think it's the running back room. Bo Jackson's now going into year 2. He was a really good running back last year. You look at their offensive line. I think their offensive line is going to be better than it was last year. You've got a lot of guys coming back. Josh Padilla is a new starter, but he did. I don't know if he started or he just came in. I think he came in to an injury in the game against Miami. I don't think he started the game. Luke Montgomery goes into his 3rd year starting. Carson Hinsman has really emerged and grown as a player. Austin Sareveld is there. The question that I have is, what do they do with Austin Sareveld? That's going to determine how much I like this line. I think a big key for me is, does Ian Moore do for Ohio State what Will Black did at Notre Dame? And that's force himself into the starting lineup. Because if they force him into the starting lineup and Sareveld moves inside, and your inside is Montgomery, Hinsman, and Sareveld with Moore and Daniels at tackle. I don't love their tackles, but they're still good. But your inside now is really good, in my opinion. And I think this could be their best offensive line in a few years if Ian Moore forces his way into the lineup. That's going to be – because I think Austin Sareveld can play tackle. He's a lot like Anthony Knapp. He can play tackle fine. But he could be really good at guard. And it's about, can Ian Moore force that to happen? That's going to be a big question mark. If that happens, then I like their offensive line even more. But big key for me is I love their secondary this year. I do. And for a team to be able to lose a top 5 pick maybe in Caleb Downs, another potential first-round pick in Davidson Igbinosun, as Trevor likes to call him, the holding king, who wasn't the holding king last year. He got a lot better last year. Lorenzo Styles is their nickel. I think Earl Little Jr. is a big upgrade over Lorenzo Styles. Now, he may not run as fast of a 40 time, but he's a much better defensive back. Terry Moore is a big question mark in regard to, is he going to be healthy? But if he looks anything like he did at Duke 2 years ago, that's a really good player. Jalen McClain goes into his second year as a key part of that rotation and a starter. Jermaine Matthews goes into his second year as a starter. He's going to be very good. And I loved Devin Sanchez coming out, Trev, but honestly, I just didn't know that he could stay at corner. I thought he was a guy that if he can't stay at corner, he's going to move to safety and be a stud at safety. Well, he showed me last year he can play corner. And I think this secondary is still elite. It's going to be different, but I think it's still an elite secondary. Yes, there's a big drop-off at linebacker. There's no question. It's still got talent, but it's a big drop-off. But I actually like the talent up front. I think your questions are very valid, Trev. Will they be, kind of what they've been in past years? And I think that's a very, very legitimate question. I don't know that they're going to necessarily be what they've been in past years with like JT and those type of guys, but it's like, okay. And that's why I didn't necessarily have them higher. You lose Caden Curry as well. But when I look at it, I think Kenyatta Jackson is actually a really good player. He's now going to really be second full year as kind of a starter. I think Bo Atkinson will be better this year, second year in the system. I think his presence helps them there as far as just having a good, solid player. The big key for them up front is going to be, can Zion Grady break out? But he's talented. I like the talent. So there's some talent to work with. But inside, I think they have a shot to be pretty good, even though they lost two really good football players. James Smith, to me, is a guy that I didn't want at Notre Dame for a host of reasons, but it makes a lot of sense for Ohio State to get him because his thing, it's not that he lacks talent. He's a talented player. He's a very undisciplined player. You know who else is an undisciplined player at Alabama? Every kid who didn't spend most of his career playing for Nick Saban. They were an incredibly undisciplined defensive line. Keon Keeley was that way. James Smith was that way. A lot of that's coaching. When you go to Ohio State, and they're going to be very different. I think they're going to be able to get a lot more out of him than what Alabama did. I like the John Walker pickup. He was a kid that Notre Dame offered out of high school, getting him from UCF. I love Edric Houston as long as he's healthy. I think he's banged up right now. I thought he was the guy. Will Smith's a good rotation player. Does Jason Moore finally break out? So there's some talent there. So I'm a little bit higher on their defensive line now than I was maybe a month ago. But the big key, Trev, that's going to make me right or wrong is, does somebody at end opposite Kenyatta Jackson step up? That's a big question mark. And does Ian Moore? So I'm projecting that Ian Moore steps up. So just in all full disclosure, the reason that I have them 3 is I'm projecting that Ian Moore is going to have a breakout spring and fall, force Austin Saraveld inside, and that makes their offensive line better. And I'm also projecting that some of the young talent on the defensive line steps up. And the reason why is I'm just looking at track record with Larry Johnson in this defense. They've just been able to lose JT and Jack Sawyer, and Caden Curry has a breakout. Kenyatta does well. That's kind of where I'm at, Trev, is projecting a little bit. There's still a lot more elite talent in this offense on this team. Are they where they were a few years ago? Maybe not, but this is a really talented Ohio State football team. I question where they're going to be in a couple years, but right now, this is maybe still a better offensive line. So it's funny how my opinion of them changed when I stopped comparing them to past versions of themselves and just started comparing them to everybody else. They jumped up a few spots for me.
No, it's interesting. They have a very, very strong case to be third. You know what I mean? This is a very, very close conversation when, like I said before.
You said that earlier, Trev. It's splitting hairs between these top teams. There's no question about it.
My number 2 team is the Oregon Ducks. Once we get into 1 and 2, I think things start to become a little bit less debatable, but I still put my number 2 team, Oregon, in the mix of, you could debate Texas 2 or Oregon 3 or Miami 2 or Oregon 3, Ohio State up at 2. A lot of strong cases to be made. When I look at this Oregon team, I love a lot of what they bring back. Dante Moore, I think, is one of the best returning starting quarterbacks in the country. I think they have a very talented wide receiving core. Evan Stewart is back healthy. They have DeCorian Moore, Jeremiah McClellan. I think Jamar Johnson's going to be a serviceable tight end. Is he going to be what Kenyon Sadiq was? I don't know if I'm going to sit there and say that he's going to be, but I think he's a talented tight end. They have a good stable of running backs coming back with Jordan Davison and Dyer Hill. They return their entire starting defensive line. And it's not just the experience. I understand I'm the show me person, but this was a talented defensive line last year with Mateo Uyunglele, Bear Alexander, Amari Washington, Tatum Tuioti. Jeremy Mixon comes back as their Mike. He started 13 games in 25, and then he finished the last 6 games of the season starting at the middle linebacker spot. And then they also bring back Devin Jackson, who played 370 snaps at linebacker as well. I really love the Coy Parrish pickup in the transfer portal. I think he's a better football player than Dylan Thieneman.
Not the athlete, but a better football player, right?
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Is he going to go to the NFL Combine and put up the numbers that Dylan Thieneman did? Probably not. I think he's a much better football player. I do. And then I think that they have a very, very talented cornerback duo. I'm very high on the duo of Jermaine Matthews and Devin Sanchez. I am. I think they're going to be battling it out for the best cornerback duo spot with Oregon because they have Brandon Feeney coming back along with Ife Obadegwu. He's also coming back as well.
Their young corners are really good, dude.
They're going to be in that conversation with those young and up-and-coming cornerbacks that we've talked about throughout this list as well. Here's the questions that I have about Oregon. You have a rebuilt left side of your offensive line, and a Yale transfer might start at right tackle. What's that going to look like? Yes, you bring back, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce these names, but you bring back your center and your right guard. Dave Luley, I can pronounce. Don't know if I can pronounce their center's name.
Apani Lalula is my best shot at it.
I love it.
They have the all-name offensive line, Trev. It's Fox Crater at left tackle, which sounds like a guy from X-Files. Kawika Rogers, Apani Lalulu, Dave Elu, and then Michael Bennett. You know, but but his backup is Janoris Wilson, Douglas Utu, Zaire Addison. They've got a freshman named Emmanuel Ihanacho, who's a stud who may end up taking over at left tackle at some point in time. But you talk about all world names. Oregon now, their offensive line coach needs to have a much better ability to pronunciate names than I have.
Or
that's for sure.
Or be great with coming up with nicknames. They just have all names in the trenches, bro. Yes. I mean, it's even on their defensive line. They have Mateo, Bear, Amari, and Tatum.
Yes.
I mean, that's pretty impressive. And Coy on the back end of the defense, along with Ife Obadegwu.
Great names. They got a kid named Iffy. You know, I mean, Aaron Flowers. Yeah, they got a great name team.
They do. No, they do, man. But their questions in the trenches are huge for me. That's one reason why I don't think that they can compete for the number 1 spot. Because when I look at my number 1 team being Notre Dame, when you're talking about offensive line play, I don't think it's overly close. If you want to give Oregon the edge on the defensive line right now, definitely not in depth, but in the starting lineup, I'll hear out that conversation. But the offensive line is a big separator for me. And then the depth along the defensive line is a big question for me. I like their portal pickups, but they lost a lot to the transfer portal in the depths, which I understand. When you bring back all 4 of your starting defensive linemen, you're going to lose a Tion Gray. I understand that completely. And then the final question I have, can the wide receiving core live up to the hype? And some of it is the hype that I'm giving them. But it's what is Evan Stewart a year removed from a significant injury with a patellar tendon injury?
Right.
What kind of jump does DeCorian Moore make? What kind of jump does Jeremiah McClellan make? And they're losing guys like Gary Bryant. So those are the questions that I have for Oregon. But when I look at the sum of all of its parts, this is absolutely a top 5 roster in college football. That's why I have them at number 2.
Yeah. I'll echo. They're my number 2, Trev. I'll echo a lot of things you said. You've got an elite quarterback. You've got an elite defensive line, in my opinion. I like the depth. They were 3 deep across the board last year. You move Aiden Breland's up. Nasir Wyatt's back. Elijah Rushing's back. You go get DeAndre Robinson, Jerome Simmons, Derek Brown out of the portal. You lose your top inside linebacker, but Devin Jackson's talented. Jerry Mixon is a productive player. You've got one of the best returning secondaries in college football. I mean, there's no question. Running back, their running back room last year was talented. It was just very young. You know, but like these guys were good enough to make you say, yeah, we're not going to play Mekhi Hughes. You know, we're just not going to play him. And you know, they went through some of their first year ups and downs last season, and their emergence is why, you know, Whittington was their starter, but you know, Jordan Davidson as a true freshman averaged 5.9 yards per carry, had 15 rushing touchdowns as a true freshman. De'Aaron Hill last year as a true freshman had 656 yards, 5 touchdowns, 8.8 yards per attempt, which is why Jay Lamar's out of there, because he's like, well, I'm playing behind these guys. I'm not going to, I'm not beating these guys out. I think they're loaded there. And then at receiver, I think if I would be more sympathetic to the injury question, Trev, with Evan Stewart and the emergence of Decorian Moore if it wasn't for this being more of a talent argument and it only being his first injury. Because they're like, well, hold on a second, Ashton Craig. But with Ashton Craig, it was a second knee injury. But I don't think they necessarily need Evan Stewart to be the guy the way that they did. If he comes back, it's a different deal. But I really like Decorian Moore. Jeremiah McClellan's a nice player. They got Iverson Hooks out of the portal from UAB. Messiah Hampton's a very talented incoming freshman. Like, there's a lot of talent there. And the big hit they took was more so at tight end, losing Kenyon Sadiq. But again, there's a lot of good talent coming back. You went to the portal, got Andrew Olesh from Penn State. You got Kendra Harrison as a true freshman. Jamari Johnson's a solid player. There's just not a lot of holes in this team outside of one spot, and that's the offensive line. That is why I had a really hard time placing Oregon. If they had last year's offensive line coming back, you could make a case that they should be 1. That big question mark is the reason why I actually considered putting them behind Ohio State and Texas. They just had more elite areas than those teams in other places. Like, stacking them up. I like Oregon's quarterback better than Ohio State's quarterback. I like Oregon's running backs better than Ohio State's running backs. And again, these are 2 very good groups. I think receiving core, I like Ohio State's number 1 better. I like Oregon's depth better. I like Oregon's tight end room a little better. I like Oregon's defensive line better. I like Oregon's linebackers better. I think the secondary is at least a wash. I slightly lean towards Oregon. There's a big difference in offensive line. So that's going to be a question mark for me, for them. But ultimately, there just were too many elite positions to put them there. That's where I was with Oregon. But this is a loaded roster.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And then number 1, just sticking with the theme of loaded rosters, you and I both have Notre Dame at the number 1 overall spot for a lot of reasons that we talked about earlier in the first segment of this show. They check a lot of the boxes. They have very, very few questions. And even at some of the places where they have questionable returning production, I think talent takes the day. This is a very loaded team. I like how they're built in the trenches. I think they have the best returning starting quarterback in the country in CJ Carr. I think they have the best secondary returning in the country. And believe me, that's not a slight to the other secondaries that we just got done talking about. But they returned the solidified number 1 best cornerback in the country coming back. I think they have the best safety tandem coming back in the country. And when we're having questions about, okay, who steps up? Is it one of Christian Gray, Dallas Golden, Aiden Pouncey, Kari Adams, DJ McKinney, Jaden Sanders? That's a heck of a spot to be in.
Right.
The depth of talent in the trenches, especially on the defensive line, is exceptional. I think they have the number 1 linebacking room coming back in the country. Because, again, I know last week we had a conversation about like ranking the defensive position groups as of today. But when we're talking about the season, there's no other team in the country that returns both of their starters and all 3 of their rotational players in the country. And that's a difference maker. I think they're going to get a bump in tight end production this year. And if we're talking touchdowns, it's not that much of a bump if we're being real about it. But I think overall, I think you get a bump in tight end production. I think the offensive line is more talented than what it was last year. Notre Dame is the number 1 most talented roster in the country.
I mean, talk about tight end for a second, Trev, because I have them number 1. I don't know that I'm willing to say right now the production is going to be better tight end. It might be the same. It might be slightly less, but it's going to be in the ballpark. The reason that I think tight ends, I'm encouraged by tight end, is I think that if there's a slight difference in pass catching, it's going to be negated by the fact that it's going to be significantly better in the run blocking area. And that's important in a year where you don't have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price anymore. A lot of things you said I agree with. I think they have the best returning quarterback in the country. He's at least in the conversation. I mean, this isn't just our opinion. Oh, you guys are homers. Hey, Trev, what are the Heisman odds? Who are the top 3 guys in the Heisman odds right now, according to FanDuel?
Tied for first is Arch Manning and CJ Carr. And then, yeah.
There you go. This isn't just us. You look at the receiving core. Okay, you can't recruit like Ohio State does at receiver. And so go get two of their studs who they wanted back, especially Mylan Graham, they wanted back. And you look at the offensive line. I don't know that there's a more physically talented offensive line in the country. There are some that will probably be better because they're more experienced and they're coached better. I think you can make a case that if I had to bet on who's going to have a better line this year, Indiana or Notre Dame, I think right now I'd say I'd understand you betting on Indiana, way more returning experience, and they've got a way better coach, with all due respect to Joe Rudolph. And that doesn't even a knock on Joe Rudolph. I just think Bob Bostad is the best in the business right now. Like, it's not even an insult. It's just that guy's the best in the business. Look at what he did with the talent that he had to work with last year. Again, not saying they're not good, but it's not to the level of the talent that Notre Dame will have. There's no Will Black and Gerby Lambert in the Indiana offensive line, just from a God-given tool standpoint. Very talented offensive line. I think from just a raw, Oregon is a much more proven edge group. I think you could argue that Notre Dame's raw talent is every bit as good as Oregon's. It's just not as proven. Boubacar Traore is not as proven as Mateo Uyunglele or Tatum, right? Bryce Young's not as proven as they are. I think talent-wise, Bryce Young is absolutely in the same ballpark as those guys. Then you bring in Keon Keeley. You talk about Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Utade, right? There's a lot of talent there, Trev. Inside in the interior, one of their key rotation players is now from last year's now one of your key rotation players this year, but he's a year older. You bring in Francis Brew. You got Jason Onye coming back. Chris Burgess stepping. I mean, just God-given tools. This defensive line is going to be a lot more talented than last year's defensive line. It's just not going to be as experienced. You don't have anyone that has the experience that Donovan Hinish had or that Jared Dawson had as a fifth-year player, Gabriel Rubio had as a fifth-year player. But you're more physically gifted. You're more athletic in your rotation this year. Your linebacker room brings everyone back that played a meaningful snap last year. Every single snap. And you talk about the secondary, best cornerback coming back in the country. That's not our opinion. He was a unanimous All-American last year. You've got arguably the best safety tandem coming back, not just our opinion. PFF ranks Tay Johnson as the number one returning safety in the country. And as much as I love Lewis Moore, neither one of Notre Dame safeties are coming off of a devastating injury where you wonder how good of a player they're going to be again. And so that's a difference. You could argue, will Ohio State be better in 2027 when Notre Dame loses Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, maybe Tay Johnson, DJ McKinney, maybe a Don Schuler? We could have that conversation. But for 2026, I think they have the best secondary in the country, and I don't know that it's overly close. And that's loving Ohio State and Oregon secondaries. I just think the experience, and there's a debate we were having in the chat earlier, how good's Christian Gray or not? And we're having a back and forth on it. And I think it's the person saying this is just someone who is in that Notre Dame fan base that just looks for everything negative for Christian Gray and was tear him apart. But let's just say for a second that he's right, that Christian Gray isn't the player that we think he is. Part of what makes Notre Dame so good is that if he's not, okay, fine. Bench him and put in Dallas Golden. Bench him and put in Jaden Sanders. Bench him and put in Mark Zachary. Bench him and put in DJ McKinney. Bench him and put in Kari Adams. Bench him and put in Aiden Pouncey. Bench him and put in Chaz Smith. That's the reality, is even if we agreed with the premise that he was saying that Christian Gray's not that good of a player, and he wasn't saying he's terrible. It's just he's not a top 50 guy. Okay. So we could debate that, but there's really no point. You have your opinion. I have mine. But the point is even if he's right, that doesn't drag down Notre Dame's secondary grade because of the talent you have to say, if he doesn't perform well, fine, move him aside, put somebody else in there who's also a really gifted player. Dallas Golden was my number one ranked player in the country in the Notre Dame class on defense coming in 2025. And it wasn't just me. Again, say, oh, you guys are Notre Dame fans, blah, blah. Well, he was also a top 100 player as a recruit coming out of high school. So, you look at those things, Trev, and you say, okay, this is why this team is so loaded, is there's really no weakness. You could argue they have the best secondary in the country. You could argue they have the best linebacking room in the country. You could argue that they have the best quarterback in the country. You could argue that they have one of the 3 or 4 most talented offensive lines in the country. Their running back room is unproven. Their talent takes a back seat to very few teams. Their tight ends are unproven. Their talent takes a back seat to very few teams. They don't have an elite number one receiver right now. Their depth of talent takes a back seat to very few teams. And that's why Notre Dame is number one. And they shouldn't suck at kicker again this year. They at least have a guy that is competent at kicker of far as was what we know. And then the final piece to me, Trevor, is the depth. You look at the guys that you're throwing onto the field if you lose a guy. It's out. You lose Drake Bowen, you put in Kingston Viliama-Asa or Madden Faramo at Mike linebacker. You lose Jaden Osbury, you put in Kingston Viliama-Asa or Jalen Smith Jalen Sneed at linebacker. You lose one of your safeties, you're putting in Luke Talich or Ethan Long. You lose one of your corners, you're putting in the guys that we just mentioned. You lose one of your ends, it's a little bit of a drop off, but you're putting a Keon Keeley in the lineup or Rodney Dunham or Ebenezer Tade. You know, you lose one of your starting receivers and you're putting in what, Mylan Graham, Micah Gilbert, Quincy Porter, Cam Williams, like Elijah Burst, Kadon Finley, Bubba Frazier, like which one of those dudes are you putting in there? And that's what to me makes this team so talented. You lose Ashton Craig, and guess what? Who you're putting in the game? A kid who started 6 games for Notre Dame last year, in a stretch of which they averaged over 200 yards rushing a game. A lot of teams would like to have a Joe Otting to have to turn to if your starting center goes down. And so that's why I think I have Notre Dame at the top. It is, and Trev, I literally sat there and was like, okay, I'm going to really pick this apart and really try to, like, as best I can, take the fact that, not that I'm a Notre Dame fan, but that I am more knowledgeable of their roster than other people's rosters, and really be ultra critical. And at the end of the day, I just kept coming back to the fact that of all the things that we view as big time quarterback, trench play, skill talent, depth of talent, do you have stars? And I think you look at that offensively, CJ Carr, pick a receiver, Gerby Lambert, Anthony Knapp. Defensively, Boubacar, Bryce Young, Francis Brew, Tion Gray, Jason Onye, Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliama-Asa, Leonard Moore, Tay Johnson, Adon Schuler, Dallas Golden. There's a lot of star power or potential star power in this roster, and it's a little bit more than those other teams. It's not significantly more. It's very close. Like if our guy Archer wanted to jump in the show and say, I'm going to make my case for Ohio State, I'd make your case. I might disagree with a couple of things, but I'm going to be like, all right, I mean, I disagree with this and this, but sure, I get it. I get it. If an Oregon fan wanted to jump in and make a case for Oregon, I say, okay, I disagree with this and this, but, you know, I get it. Same with Texas, same with Miami. To me, I think there's 6 teams that kind of separate from everybody else, Trev. When I look at the elite rosters in the country, who has an elite roster? This is the final piece. For me, I view the top 6 teams as having elite rosters. My cutoff is between Georgia and Indiana. And actually, you know what? I'm going to check that. My cutoff is between Georgia and Miami. I think Georgia's got a borderline elite roster, but here's what separates Georgia and Indiana from the top 5. Who's the proven star at the skill positions for those teams? And that's what's the separator for me. So I think right now there's 5 rosters that I view as elite in the country. And that's why Miami, Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, and Notre Dame, in whatever order you want to put them, are the top 5 teams for me.
Yeah, I mean, we have the exact same top 5, just in different orders, and I echo a lot of the same things that you said about it. I think that these top 5, in whatever order that you want to put them in rankings, and some of them are like, sometimes with people in the chat or even in conversations that you and I have, we're talking about who's 5 and who's 4. We're talking about who's 3 and who's 4, who's 2 and who's 3. When I look at these 5 rosters, take away the numbers next to their team names. These are the 5 rosters that I believe have the best shot to compete for a championship this upcoming season. That was my biggest separator because they check a lot of those boxes. I'm with you. I'm with you completely. Brian, to wrap up this segment, who are some of the quick teams, and we can run through it real quickly, Who are some of the teams that were kind of in your honorable mentions list?
There was a few, Trev, that I looked at. SMU is one, surprisingly. When I looked through their roster as a team that I thought, you know what, they're at least in the conversation. Clemson was in the honorable mention. They're off from the others, but they're in there. A couple other teams, obviously Big Ten. I did look at USC and Michigan. I think Michigan is closer to USC across the board. I actually like Michigan's receiving core this year more than USC's coming back. And I think Michigan's quarterback is a lot more raw, but I think he's more physically talented. But then I like USC's offensive line better than Michigan's this year, which was a really interesting conversation. And then in the SEC, Trev, A&M is a team that was in the conversation for me. They actually were going to be in my top 10 off of gut. But when I break it down, there's way too many question marks in the trenches for them. They're not elite at the skill positions, and they're very good at receiver. Are they elite? And their quarterback is not in the same league as a lot of the other teams on here. And then a final one was LSU, but there's too many holes on some of these teams' rosters for me to say, okay, they're top 10. And so that's why those teams missed the mark for me, Trev, and why they weren't in, when I actually put the list together, why they weren't in my top 10. Like, I looked at Tennessee. There's some things I love about that roster, but again, too many big holes for me to have them in there. And that's really what separated. There's some position groups with these teams we just mentioned where you can say that stacks up with anybody else in there, but there's just not enough of that. And there's too many big question marks at the important places, quarterback, trenches, for me to have those teams in my top group. Like when you look at LSU, there's parts of that roster that you could say they belong in this conversation with teams in top 5 to 7. But then there's other positions where you're like, it's not even close between where they are and the teams in top 5 to 7. And that's where Lane Kiffin is going to have to continue to build. He's going to have to continue to build up the trenches. They're going to be competitive there, but like you look at their trench depth chart and compare it to Notre Dame, Oregon, Ohio State, Miami, teams like that, it's just not the same. And that's why those teams are slightly behind and missed the mark. But there wasn't this like Texas Tech, and then there's this giant, gulf of space between them and number 11. But I do think comfortably they're 10. They're closer to 9 than they are 11. I do it was actually a little easier to do the top 10 once I dove into the stats, the data, the depth charts, and then the criteria that we created. The top 10 separated themselves pretty good for me. What about you, Trev?
We share a lot of the same in our honorable mentions. I have Clemson in my honorable mentions. I love their upside, but you kind of come back to like that proven high-level talent. Outside of Bryant Wesco, TJ Moore, and Will Helt, who are their dudes? I'm all down for using projection, especially on a list like this. But when I'm using projection, majority projection in their secondary and on the offensive line and on the defensive line, it becomes a little bit too much for me. So I held them out. Texas A&M was another one. Trenches took the day in that one. BYU was in the conversation for me. They're very experienced, but I filed them under the category of, I think we've kind of just, outside of Bear Bachmeier, I think we've kind of just seen the best of their roster. I think they're good. Look, they got smoked by Texas Tech. That's also the only team they lost to in 2025. Like they had as much of a case, depending on which frame you're looking at, even a more of a case to make the playoffs than what Notre Dame did. I understand a lot of the frustrations out in Provo, but I think with their roster, what I came down to is I think we've just kind of seen the best of it. Whereas I don't think in my top 10, we've seen the best of their rosters. Thought about LSU for a little bit as well. The biggest thing for me is I know when you talk just talent, this shouldn't be as big of a factor, but playing cohesively as a good football team also has to matter, coaching aside. LSU has 23 transfer portal players in their 2 deep between offense and defense. And we've seen a lot of teams before. It's like, I mean, if we're talking just strictly talent, then you could argue Florida State in 2023 or 2024, could have been in the conversation of top 10 talented rosters. But that's a lot of moving pieces. Now, Lane Kiffin is a head coach that has experience kind of bringing that all together. But I'm with you. There's pieces where you are top 10 talent-wise, but together as a full team, I had to leave them out. So those are some of my honorable mention teams. But I'm with you. Once we kind of dove into this and we sat down and dove into the depth charts, and the top 10 became a very easy conversation. It's just who got sorted into where was the big thing. So I'm with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you completely. Brian, to take us home here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we got a daily mailbag to take us home. And if this is your first mailbag, you can put MB for mailbag or a little mailbox emoji. That lets us know to set your question aside. With this being a daily mailbag, we've already had an awesome show up to this point. We can't go forever. It's not like the Friday free-for-all mailbag. So if you do want your question answered, you can always bump it to the top with a super chat. And I think our guy Christopher Galloway, a.k.a. Black Irish, got us kicked off today.
Yeah, he said just not able to listen today, but here's to the best show going today. So I really appreciate that. So we're at least going to make half of $9.99 for today's show, Trev, since YouTube is still yet to monetize the show. Apparently, they're having some issues. We got a heads up from StreamYard. It looks like it finally went through, so we'll at least maybe be able to monetize the last 5 minutes of the show. So there you go. But I appreciate the super chat very much. And look, we're still taking questions. If you guys want to get some more in, go ahead and get those in right now. But let's next go to Sine, Cosine, Tangent, our guy T. Schaup.
If you had to make a dream team of current players on the roster, would you rather have CJ or Leonard Moore?
I'd rather have, CJ Carr, and that has nothing to, I think Leonard Moore's their best player. It's really just about the value of the position. If I could have an elite corner or elite quarterback, I'd take an elite quarterback. And that's true for who would I rather have, Dante Moore or Aaron Flowers, or the two stud corners at Oregon? Would I rather have Julian Sand or Devin Sanchez or Jermaine Matthews? That's true for every one of these conversations. I just think an elite quarterback is going to bring even more value than an elite receiver. Give me two really good corners and a great pass rush, and I'm going to be just fine. And so that's why between the two, I'd have to go there, man. That it'd be tough not to pick the elite quarterback. You don't need an elite quarterback to win it all. It just makes it a whole lot easier.
Yep, I'm with you.
Let's go to our next question from Jay Melvin.
USC misses the playoffs. Lincoln Riley will be fired. He was a part of the cycle with Coach Marcus Freeman and Dan Lanning, Mario Cristobal.
Okay. Yeah.
And all have surpassed him. I don't expect every coach to be Curt Cignetti, but I do expect year-over-year progression.
I agree. And I think who were the I'm looking this up right now. Who were the coaching hires in 2022 in college football? Because it wasn't just those guys. I mean, there were a lot of coaches like that. I mean, Mike Elko, I think, got his first head coaching job in 2022, correct? Wasn't that his first year as a coach? And at Duke, right? He was 2 years at Duke, I believe. And that was obviously a great hire. That same year, you had Jeff Brom got hired at Louisville, right? Wasn't that Brom's first year? I thought it was, but there was a lot of good hires that season, Trev, that have really been successful. Actually, I could be wrong. Actually, Brom's first year might have been 23.
I thought it was 23.
But you had Brent Venables at Oklahoma. He surpassed. I mean, look, the guy that replaced you at Oklahoma has done a better job at Oklahoma than you've done at USC. I mean, Brian Kelly at LSU was a failure. You were a failure. Billy Napier was a failure. Sonny Dykes took TCU to a championship game, but Lincoln Riley can't take USC to a championship game. And, it's Big Ten. Yes, first 2 years, they weren't in the Big Ten. Kalen DeBoer has been way better than he has been 2 years. Even at Alabama, Kalen DeBoer's taken two different teams to the playoffs. Now, again, they didn't deserve to be in last year. But they had a way better case than USC had in year 4 of Lincoln Riley. So, yeah, there's been a lot of hires. And then, of course, just looking through some others here, Trev, like Duke getting Mike Elko was a big one. He's done really well. That was the first year of Joey McGuire at Texas Tech. He surpassed you. Like Tony Elliott at Virginia has as many 10-win seasons since 2022 as what Lincoln Riley has at USC. Think about that for a second. So, yeah, there were Jim Mora, at UConn, you could argue has done as good of a job as what he has done. So, I absolutely think he's been lapped in that regard. So the question is, if they miss the playoffs, does he get fired? I think it goes back to the question that we had the other day in the Buy So Hold, Trev, about Matt Rule. Well, what's the non-playoff season look like? Do they go 10-2 and just barely miss the playoffs this year? Well, if that's the case, no, they don't get fired, because if they go 10-2 this year and just miss the playoffs because it's a year where there's just a lot of really good 10-2 teams, I don't think you fire them after that. Because let's say they go 10-2 this year, Trev, miss the playoffs, and their losses are at Indiana and, say, home against Ohio State. Well, that would mean that they'd also have a win over Washington, a win over Oregon, a win at Penn State. Let's say they lose to Oregon and Ohio State. That means they have a win at Indiana, Washington, at Penn State. Like, whatever scenario you choose, if they go 10-2 and miss the playoffs, I don't think he goes fired. I would also argue that if they go 9-3 and miss the playoffs, he doesn't get fired. Let's say they lose to Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana. They would still have a win over Washington, a win at Penn State, a win at Wisconsin, a win at UCLA. I don't know that that's enough to get him fired. I don't. You could argue that it should, but I don't think it does, especially with what they're doing on the recruiting trail. He's going to be able to argue, look what we've got coming in, give us one more year, and then we're going to be really good. And in 27, the argument also he's going to make is we have a way more manageable schedule in 27. I think that would be the argument. Anything worse than 9-3, and there's a chance he could be done. And should.
A lot of it's going to come down to what do those losses look like. They're not going undefeated with that schedule. If they're 9-3, but their 3 losses are to by far the 3 best teams that they play in their blowouts. Look, we're also talking about a team that's going into, and a head coach that's going into a year where they threw a big enough hissy fit to get one of the best rivalries in college football expunged. And we're not going to see it at least until after 2030. So you did that with the mindset of, like, we got to do everything to make the playoffs. It's like, okay, well, if you're not going to make the playoffs, you better be pretty darn close to being on the verge of making the playoffs. Like, if you don't make the playoffs in similar fashion that BYU didn't, or Notre Dame didn't, or heck, even have the ability to try to spin it, although I won't agree with it, in the same way that Texas or Vanderbilt didn't make the playoffs. You have to be in somewhat of that position if you don't make it. But this is a big prove it year. We talked about it in the buy sell hold. We also talked about it last week in, the ascending teams and descending teams and teams going into a prove it year. USC is very much in the prove it year for both of us, because it's just, look, man, you can't regress year over year. You can't feast off of the talent that you brought in from other schools at previous coaching jobs anymore. You got Notre Dame removed from your schedule. If they don't have success this year, and we already kind of outlined it, you're going to be playing you just wait till next year when the schedule's better and we got the recruits in. And then what happened? Well, the recruits are young and we got to develop them, but just wait till 2028. We got a new class coming in. We've seen that same old song and dance before. If Lincoln Riley doesn't have success this year, I think that's just what's going to be on the dock for them.
And the team that you left is better than you are.
Significantly.
Yeah.
Super chat.
Hold on. I have to read this one. This is from Chief Brody, our guy Bobo. This should cover my nonsense for the week. The fact that you think $4.99 covers your nonsense, Chief, we're going to have a long conversation. That covers your nonsense for the second part of the show today, my friend. Come on now, Chief. Got to have some realistic expectations of who we are. I love Chief. That's why I'm giving him a hard time. Thanks for the super chat, my man. I do genuinely appreciate it.
Super chat from Daily Comments, our resident Miami fan. This also goes along with another mailbag question that we had earlier as well. It says, how excited are you for November 7th? And does game day go there with ESPN not passing up the opportunity for the storylines? Lots of other great games that day.
If Miami and Notre Dame are both top 10 questions, top 10 teams, if at least one of them is undefeated, I think there's no doubt that ESPN goes to Notre Dame that day. They didn't go to South Bend at all last year, I don't believe.
Correct? No, they haven't been at South Bend since Ohio State in 23.
I've been in South Bend for a while, and I don't love to come to South Bend, but I think Notre Dame Miami rivalry, the drama from last year's playoff debate, how they framed it as Notre Dame versus Miami, when in reality it should have been Notre Dame and Miami versus Alabama. That was the point that we always made. Is when I look at this whole situation, right? Yes, there's other big games. Yes, there's games that are on their network. I don't think they're going to pass up the opportunity to make a bunch of money off of Notre Dame when they can, and to hype that game up and get their piece of the pie. They can't get the hype from covering the game, but they can get the hype from game day being there and get all the stuff that comes from that. I do think that. Now, if Miami's got 2 losses or they both have a loss or a bad loss and they're neither top 5, then you're going to see them go somewhere else. But if these 2 teams are as good as, Trevor and I just both had them in the top 5, they should both be undefeated coming into this game. With all due respect to BYU, with all due respect to, Wisconsin and some of the other teams that Notre Dame plays, there's no question that Notre Dame should be undefeated coming into that game. And I'll say the same thing looking at Miami's schedule. With all due respect to Florida State, with all due respect to Clemson, they should be undefeated coming into that game. Now, I would argue playing at Clemson could be more risky for them than Notre Dame playing at BYU. I think that's debatable. But they're both going to be very tough games. But neither team, Trev, have the rosters that Miami and Notre Dame have. And if they are what we think they are, I think it's going to be – I think ESPN would know if we don't go there, then the whole we support teams that we have a broadcast deal with becomes you can never deny it now. You've got 2 top 4 teams, both undefeated in November. All the storylines that go with it, Catholics versus convicts, last year's playoff thing, and you picked another SEC game? Don't ever tell us again that you're not biased. I think they're at least smart enough to know that.
You'd think. There's a good chance that they're there. I would be shocked, but there are some other really good games that day. I think like Alabama, LSU's that day. I could see Fox big noon kickoff going to Oregon, Ohio State, especially because that game will likely be a noon kickoff. So
and they don't
I
normally go to the same place, do they? I know there's been times, but they don't normally do that in the regular season.
No.
I think there was like once last year, the year before. I don't think they normally do. And so, yeah, I definitely don't think they're going to want to take 2 Big Ten teams over Notre Dame. And like LSU and Alabama is an interesting one, Trev, because I don't think either one of those teams are going to be undefeated by that point in time. And they're both going to be very good, but like, how do you take 8 versus 11 over 1 versus 3? Just as a for instance, there's a world in which number 1, 2, 3, and 4 in some ranking play each other that weekend.
Yeah, that weekend's
because there's a chance that Oregon and Ohio State could also both be undefeated by that point in time. And if they are, and you look at their schedule, if Notre Dame, Miami, Oregon, and Ohio State are all undefeated that weekend, going into that weekend, there's some combination of 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the rankings. I don't care who else is undefeated. Like that's what I think.
Yeah, that weekend of November 7th is going to be nuts. My couch is going to become my best friend that weekend. It's going to be absolutely
And the reason I say that is because if Ohio State's undefeated, Texas is not.
Right.
And if they're both undefeated, Indiana is not. That's why I'm saying that, because of their schedule. So that's going to be a very interesting weekend. But I do think game day will be there. I do. Good super chat. Thank you for that. Here we go. Let's go back up to the top. Another one from Jay Melvin.
Brian, outside of Notre Dame over the past 12 months, who are your 5 hottest recruiting teams that have been killing it in the recruiting trail? Not necessarily the rankings, but the players that they're getting.
So this is just kind of off the top of my head. I could go back and really dive into it, but just looking at it off the top of my head, outside of Notre Dame, I think Texas A&M is really hot on the recruiting trail. I think Miami's been pretty hot on the recruiting trail. You have to give love to USC over the last year. I mean, they're doing a very good job recruiting the last year. After that, boy, that's a tougher one. I mean, Oklahoma's doing a great job. I mean, would they be top 5? They're in the conversation. I think Oklahoma's in the conversation. Oregon's definitely in the conversation for top 5. Texas is definitely in the conversation for top 5. Like, just off the top of my head, I think those are the teams. Georgia's on the borderline, but I think those other teams have been better. Ohio State's on the borderline. I think those other teams have just been better. for where we are today. Now we'll see how teams close in 2027, but if you're just looking like in the last 12 months, so from last April till now, I think those are the hottest teams in college football, along with Notre Dame.
From Riley Erdman, do you think Coach Jaywan Sider, the running back coach, gets picked up by the NFL after this upcoming season?
I don't have any idea. I think it's possible. I do think that there was some interest from the NFL in him, but I don't know. I have no idea. I could see a world in which he wants to test out the NFL waters. I could also see a world in which, how do I not coach all these kids that I recruited? We'll have to see.
Yeah.
Let's get down to Joseph Parr.
How do you feel about a coach gloating in front of the media about he ripped his player in practice? I'm referring to Cignetti, gloating about how he ripped Marsh in practice for his cleats.
I have no problem with it. If I can sense that there's a purpose behind what you're saying, I have no problem with it. And when I watched that to me was a very clear message to Nick Marsh and some other transfer players to say, you're coming here to be part of what we're doing. We're not changing for you. You're changing to be part of what we're doing. Right? Like, we just want a title without you. When you come here, you've got to buy into what we're doing. To me, it's no different than Mike Denbrock kind of with the little jab at Elijah Burris last year, like, hey, he's a talented kid. We have trouble guarding him. I just wish he could learn the plays. To me, it's no different than that. It's using the media, send a message. Hey, man, you're great stuff, but don't think you're bigger than what we're doing here. And I also thought it was kind of in jest. I don't think he was like I don't think it was what some people have portrayed it to be. It's kind of like his comment at Sonny Dykes' trip. He winked at the end of it. He was having some fun. He wasn't like, destroy Sonny Dykes. It wasn't like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what I was going to bring up. I mean, we can't talk about him dogging on one of his players without bringing up that he also defended one of his players, both in a lighthearted spirit. We got to look. Am I the biggest Curt Cignetti fan as a person? Would I want to go out to dinner with him? Probably not. But there's obviously a method to his madness, and he's doing okay.
Speaking of that, let's bring up this next one because it does go in line. This is from Jay Melvin that goes in line with the Cignetti and all that other kind of stuff.
Brian, did it make you smile watching Coach Cignetti put Sonny Dykes in a body bag for trying to bury Josh Hoover? And do you think Sonny Dykes is a very overrated coach who will continue to regress?
I don't think he's an overrated coach because I don't know that anyone that views him as a top 10 coach. I think people view him as a good football coach, and I think he is. They've gone 9 wins the last 2 years, right? And then they also have a trip to the college football championship game. Now, they got annihilated, but it's freaking TCU. They beat Michigan, the team that would win the championship the next year. I think he's a good football coach, and I think most people agree he's a good football coach. I think Sonny Dykes is a good offensive mind. I think there's a lot of things to like about Sonny Dykes. I think that we came to find out that Garrett Riley wasn't the offensive genius behind their success in 2022. But yeah, guys got football coach. I mean, look, since 2019, he's had a 10-win season at SMU. He then had 3 straight bowl games, 4 out of 5 years at SMU. How many coaches, Trev, can look back and say, hey, I took SMU to 4 bowl games in 5 years? You know what I mean? Like, that's not a lot of coaches, or 3 and 4 because he wasn't the full-time coach in 2017. But, that's pretty successful. It's a pretty good track record. In 4 years at TCU, he's had 2 9-win seasons and a 13-win season. He's a good football coach. I don't think he's overrated. If somebody will say, hey, I think he's a number 7 coach in the country, then I think, okay, I'm going to have to push back on that, but I don't know that anybody views him that way. So I don't think he's overrated at all. He's a good football coach. There's a long track record of success beyond just 2022. Did I enjoy watching Curt Cignetti kind of put him in a body bag, so to speak? That was a funny exchange, yes. And Cignetti's smirking the entire time. He was not like, I didn't like that Sonny said that. I didn't think Sonny was trying to be cheap on Josh Hoover. I don't think that was his intent. I think the way he delivered it definitely was improper. Like, dude, be better than that. Could you imagine Marcus Freeman be like, yeah, well, I mean, the thing that CJ gives us over Steve Angeli is he'll actually throw, more check. He won't just throw checkdowns all the time. Like, what's that necessary for? Like, you know what I mean? Like, just praise CJ Carr. You don't need to give me this mess about taking a shot at Steve Angeli. You know what I mean? Like, that's not necessary. I don't think he was intentionally trying to take a shot. I don't think, but he did. and I didn't think it was necessary. A little bit classless, and I thought Kurt Cignetti responding the way he did was well played. And he smiles the whole time, and he gives a little wink. That wink was for Sonny Dykes, but I thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah, for sure.
He's growing on me a little bit. I think he's kind of but he's growing on me a little bit as a coach, because it's hard not to respect how well coached his teams are. I just got to live a little bit with some of the prickly things that he says, and the look at me, I'm the man, Google me type of crap that he says, and then we can't make fun of his, we beat the mess out of ranked teams anymore, because it's not just the top 25 teams at JMU he's talking about. It's talking about Oregon, now he's talking about, teams like that. It's a little bit of a different deal now, but.
Oh, for sure. I respect him. I just don't like him.
Agree. But it's like, he doesn't bother me as much as he used to, because it's like, well, he backs it up. And I like people that back up their talk.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, how do you think our edge rushers are doing in spring, particularly our starters, Boubacar, Keon, and Bryce? Do you think Partridge is doing a good job picking up where Washington left off?
I mean, we've only seen one in a quarter practices, so it's really hard to tell firsthand. I can tell you from talking to different people, I think that they're doing very well. Keon keeps getting better every day. Bryce has taken a jump. I've heard that him and Will Black are having some great battles this spring. And also, I would also throw in there the two freshmen are really taking jumps this spring as well, Rodney Dunham and Ebenezer Utade. So from what I've been told, things are going well. We'll get to see 4 periods tomorrow. But honestly, a lot of what I'm going to tell you about how good they're looking is going to be coming from what I'm told, because of what we're seeing. We just don't see a whole lot.
From Riley Erdman, I keep seeing footage in spring practice of Christian Gray getting beat by a lot of receivers. When do we draw the line and be real about his 50-50 performances?
No one should ever look at a clip of a practice and say he should do that. Remember last year when there was a practice, we saw CJ Carr get picked off twice? Does that mean CJ Carr sucks and is going to get turned the ball over a million times this year? We had this debate in the chat. I don't care about rehashing it. Basically, that's your confirmation bias. You have an opinion of Christian Gray, and so you see a play like that, and you see him getting beat. It's like, okay, I saw Mark Zachary getting torched in practice the first couple times. Why? Because they keep putting out offensive highlights. Let's see what happens when they start putting out some defensive highlights, and it'll probably look different. But if you're making an opinion based off of seeing like one play clips from practice, then you're basically confirming you something you already believed. And that doesn't mean that everyone else should then jump on with your opinion because they saw 2 clips from a practice.
From Tommy Guns, in fictional 2026 3-game series, I don't know what those locations are. HANS locations?
Home, away.
Neutral site.
Yeah.
Gotcha. You'd pick Notre Dame to win at least 2 games against each of the rest of the expected preseason top 10 teams. If not, which national opponent wins 2?
I mean, Notre Dame, I think, is the best team in college football. We both just said they have the best roster. So, yes, they should win 2 of those 3. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a fair question, and I wish I could give you more, but I just don't think there's anybody. Now, there are teams that could beat them and pick the top 5 teams that we looked at. Oregon, Ohio State, Miami, and Texas all could beat Notre Dame twice in a world in which we don't look at it as like, what a disappointing game. If you lose twice to somebody outside the top 5, I'm very disappointed. Very disappointed. Like if Notre Dame beats Ohio State by 14 at home, loses by a field goal on the road, and loses by a field goal in a neutral site game, I'm disappointed, but I'm like, that's a really good football team, and you lost 2 close games when it was your environment. You whooped them. Right? Like that. I don't think that would happen, but like that's like, okay, yeah, that's possible. It's possible. And that's true for the 4 other top 5 teams. Because you and I had the same top 5, correct, Trev? We just had them in a different order. Miami, Ohio State, Texas, Notre Dame, and Oregon, right? Those were our 5, just a different order.
Yes, sir.
I think it's fair to say that.
Agreed.
So get another one from Tommy Guns.
What one guy that left Notre Dame for either the NFL or the portal would you have advised to have come back to Notre Dame if you were their agent?
Well, assuming that they were allowed to come back to Notre Dame, I would have probably advised Billy Schrauth to come back and not go to the NFL draft. I understand why he did, but I don't know that his value was as high as it could have possibly been. I don't know that there's anything Emil Wagner could have done to improve his value, Trev. I just think Emil was he is what he is. I think Billy Schrauth could have come back, tried to stay healthy, and improved his stock. Didn't. It is what it is. Josh Burnham definitely is someone who I would have advised to come back. I think that was a bad decision by Josh. Now, he'll be fine at Indiana. But then coming back to Notre Dame, he would have been, if not a starter, one of the number 3. He'd have been ahead of Keon Keeley in the rotation and would have had a big year, in my opinion, and would have played a lot more under Charlie Partridge and could have really utilized the things that Charlie Partridge is trying to teach. I think Josh definitely made a mistake leaving. I wish him all the best. I love that kid, love the family, but if I was his agent, I absolutely would have advised Josh to come back to Notre Dame. Outside of that, Trev, I don't know that there's anybody that I look back and I would have advised Jeremiah and Jadarian to both go pro. I would have advised Emil to go pro. Eli couldn't come back. Will Pauling couldn't come back. Jadon Blair wanted to come back, but was advised to leave by the GM. So nothing I could have done would have changed that as his agent. I don't blame Scrap Richardson for leaving. He was a talented kid, but closer to home. He was buried in the depth chart. I understand Anthony Sacca leaving. I understand Bodie Cahoon leaving. They're both going to have way faster opportunities somewhere else. I mean, if we take the Notre Dame degree part out of it, you've decided that it's not worth it for you to stay. So let's decide if you should go somewhere else. Then I think they both made decisions I don't like because I selfishly wanted them to stay. But if I was advising them, I completely understand both of them leaving. I'm trying to think who else, Trev. I thought Armo Muka made a mistake. I'm glad he came back. That was a good one.
I would have advised Cree Thomas to come back.
Oh, yeah. I get why he left, though. That's the thing is I get why he left. But yeah, I maybe I don't advise him to come back. I probably would have advised him to go somewhere other than Colorado. That might be a better response because he was going to have a tough time getting in the starting lineup. Because by the time a spot opens up now, Kari's going into year 2, and that'd have been a tough one. But I wish he would have come back. Selfishly, again, he's definitely one that I would have really wanted to come back.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, do you think the discussion in college football around Lanning has gotten very radical, similar to the Chris Ash discussion at Notre Dame, where people completely overreact to him to the point where you have to defend him?
I don't know that I've experienced whatever it is you're talking about. And that sounded really dismissive, and I'm not trying to be. I just haven't seen a whole lot of ripping of him outside of some Notre Dame fans. And I don't, if anything, when I've had disagreements with people on Dan Lanning, exactly, Trev, it's the other way around. It's hold on a second. You're hyping him up a little bit too much for a guy that's really never won a big game. Oh, but he beat Ohio State by a point at home a year ago. Okay, yeah, but what happened when they had a rematch on a neutral field that's a whole lot closer to Eugene, Oregon than it is Columbus, Ohio in the Rose Bowl? They got annihilated. Look, both games against India. First game, tough game. Second game, you got destroyed. And I mean, games that would make Brian Kelly blush. Well, you really got crushed in that game. You know what I mean? That's how bad it was. I mean, at least in 2020, Brian Kelly's Notre Dame team at least competed against Alabama. They had no chance to win the game. They played not to lose, and it disgusted me. But they didn't get the game. Wasn't it was 35-0 at halftime of that game. I mean, it was like a whooping. And then the Indiana game this year was embarrassing. So if anything, I've had to kind of push back on some of the overhyping of Dan Lanning, as opposed to I've never been forced to defend. Well, once I was forced to defend Dan Lanning with some oomph, but usually it's the other way around.
Yeah, that's in my experiences. It's been the other way around. I haven't had to defend Dan Lanning too much.
Yeah. I'd be curious to see, Jay Melvin, where that conversation is happening.
From Gloric, I don't have a question today. Just looking forward to finally adding a new line to the Play Like a Champion sign at the end of the season. Go Irish.
Man, that'd be great, wouldn't it, Trev? That'd be very nice. Very, very nice.
Yeah, there'd be no complaints on my end.
Yeah, would love it. Thanks, Gloric.
From Sign Cosine Tangent, what does Notre Dame lack when it comes to wide receiver recruiting compared to schools like Ohio State?
The elite guys, like the big time, the Jeremiah Smiths, the Emeka Egbukas, the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s, the elite 5-star, like super high floor, super high ceiling stars.
Yeah, like agreed. And the road to get there, they lack the on-field production that what Ohio State brings to the table. If they're going head-to-head for a guy, it's Ohio State can simply look at the receivers that we've put out. Like we put out Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka and Jackson Smith and Jigba and all those guys. I mean, even before then, Terry McLaurin, Michael Thomas back in the mid-teens. Yeah, like, you know, whereas Notre Dame, it's like, okay, Boykin was around the league. Claypool had a great rookie year. Fuller was great until like injuries kind of took him over. And then since then, it's kind of been like, you know, so that's what it is.
And none of those guys were like great NFL players, to your point. Michael Floyd's, I think, the only one that had 1,000-yard season. But like, and then the other thing about Ohio State is even before like their recent history with like Curtis Samuel and like you said, Michael Thomas and guys like that, like there was a time back in the day where Ohio State was putting out a bunch of big time receivers. You know, not just like Ted Ginn in 2006 and Anthony Gonzalez both got drafted. You know, you look back to Santonio Holmes was a first-round draft pick. Michael Jenkins was a first-round draft pick. You know, this is back in the early Jim Tressel days. You know, you look in the era of John Cooper. You had David Boston was a number 8 overall pick. You know, they were putting Terry Glenn was a first-round draft pick. Joey Galloway. They had something they could point back to build their current thing up that wasn't just the Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, Michael Thomas. Like your points are correct, Trev, but it was pointing to those guys along with, hey, but this isn't new to us. Look what we used to do. We're getting back to that. What's Notre Dame? Hey, we're getting back to Tim Brown back in 1987 or 1988. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not the track record. And so Notre Dame's gonna, I mean, to have the kind of success that Ohio State has had, they have to kind of start it from anew. You know, it's there isn't a time where like DB, Trev, with what Mike Mickens has done and what we're hoping that Aaron Henry can do, it's get back to the way it was when Lou Holtz was here. When you had Todd Light in the first round, Tom Carter, Bobby Taylor, Jeff Burris, I mean, you had all these big-time DBs that went to the NFL and had some level of success or were high draft picks. It's like, hey, can you get back to being that? With receiver D-end, you don't really have that track record. What's your track record? Man, back remember when Ross Browner was, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have that. And that helped Ohio State as well. So it's you've got to establish it. And to Trev's point, you actually do have a decent track record of the last 15 years, Golden Tate, Michael Floyd. That's what you need to be able to sell. But in order to do that, you got to start doing some of that now. And hopefully it does. I think it's starting to turn. You're seeing more of these big-time guys. Notre Dame used to never be in the debate with them. Now they're finishing 3rd, 4th, 5th. You know, one good season, and all of a sudden maybe you start winning some of those battles. And they're close on a couple kids in this class. That's why Julius Jones Jr. is such an important recruit to go get. I think he is elite. You know, getting Cade Coopers and Quentin Burrells and guys like that, start winning some of those battles. And then you go look at the 28 class and try to win some of those battles. They're getting closer, in my opinion. But the only coach that I know of that's been able to land those type of guys was Charlie Weiss. That was it. Because Floyd was a 5-star. Golden Tate was an ESPN 5-star. Raymond McKnight was not a big-time guy. Mo Stovall was a big-time guy, and that was Ty. But like Samardzija wasn't a big-time guy. Will Fuller wasn't a big-time guy. But Charlie went out and got that. He got Golden Tate. He got Michael Floyd. He got Duval Kamara, who was a 5-star guy. He was able to get those guys. And Deion Walker was a big-time recruit, if you remember him in the 08 class. other than that, like all the guys that Brian Kelly got were good recruits, but they weren't elite recruits. Miles Boykin wasn't an elite recruit. Javon McKinley wasn't an elite. They were very good, but they weren't elite like Floyd, like Tate, like Duval Kamara. Now, again, Duval didn't pan out, but we're just talking about what they were as recruits, the 5-star, top of the board type of guys.
Tommy Guns, which tight end would you choose to motion into the backfield and have a lead block on ISO on the goal line or fourth and got to go for it?
James Flanagan. That's an easy one.
Yep. Yeah. One of the Flanagans, probably James.
I think he's more explosive getting through the hole, and he bends a little better. That's probably where I would go with him. But, yeah.
Then who's most likely to score a big man touchdown?
Will Black. I mean, y'all saw what he did in high school with that screen pass he caught. Not only did he catch it clean, but showed some wheels. So, yeah, I'd say Will Black.
Yeah. That'd be mine. Yeah. I'll go a little bit off the cuff. I'm going to go Matty Augustine. I could see them bringing in like a 6 offensive lineman, but then lining him up like not on the line of scrimmage. So maybe he sneaks out. I could see that. From Andy M. Moore, November 7th features Georgia at Ole Miss, Alabama at LSU, Oregon at Ohio State, and Miami at Notre Dame. Do you think College Game Day comes to South Bend? Also, BYU versus Utah as well.
So I wanted to bring this up, not because we're going to answer it again, because we already answered it earlier, but I thought it was good to show this, to show the games that are that weekend. That, to me, based on preseason analysis of teams, is by far the best weekend of the season, even better than rivalry weekend.
Oh, yeah.
This week, and it's those are just some of those big games, but there's some others, Trev, that when we were looking at that week, where you're like, dude, that schedule is insane. Like, that is going to be a great week of college football. You're almost kind of wishing that Notre Dame had a bye that weekend because you could maybe watch some of those games. But like, there's a lot of games like that weekend. Like, there's some, like Friday night, Virginia Tech SMU is a game I'm very much looking forward to. Oklahoma's at Florida that weekend. He mentioned Alabama and LSU already, correct?
Yeah.
But like, there's some BYU at Utah he mentioned. Kentucky at Tennessee is going to be a very interesting football game that weekend. Michigan State is that weekend. So there's going to be some really good games that weekend, even beyond just the ones that we're thinking of that are big-time games. And then some games that don't compete with that, but like Arkansas-Auburn, I'm very intrigued by. Louisville-Georgia Tech on Friday night. It's going to be a very interesting game. Texas at Missouri, Texas A&M at South Carolina. Those are some interesting games. Look, I'll give the SEC a lot of credit. The SEC is putting a lot more effort into making sure that they still have great regular season games, more so than the Big Ten, who Big Ten's basically trying to give most of their best teams just cake schedules, except for Ohio State this year, like once every 4 years. But like the SEC, like, you got to give them credit, Trev. Almost every week there's big time games. I'm very curious to see by that point in time in the season, the Oklahoma State at Kansas State. How are those teams developing? You know, that's another interesting. Nebraska at Illinois. I think I mentioned already Michigan State at Michigan. That'll be an interesting one. Penn State at Washington. How's Penn State going to be at that point in time? So that's going to be a great weekend of college football. Great weekend of college football.
Oh, it's going to be nuts. Going to be nuts. My couch and I are going to be best friends.
You're probably going to be up in town for the tailgate that day, my friend.
I don't know if I'm bringing a 1-month-old to that tailgate, my friend.
You have to talk to your wife, babysitter. You're both coming up. You're going to leave her with the neighbors.
Not a chance.
She'll be a month and a half years old. She can roll over by that point in time, Trev. That's a good time to leave kids, right? I think I saw it in movies.
Actually, the best time.
Yeah,
so I've heard.
Where are they going to go? Oh, that hurt. Shouldn't joke like that.
From Tom Redinger, have there been any rumblings on McKinney, Jaden Sanders, and Zachary at corner?
Well, DJ McKinney's not on campus yet, so there won't be any rumblings about him this summer. But I don't know that there's any rumblings. Jaden Sanders is getting a lot of work. They're really pushing the issue with him playing a lot of different positions. So I think they like what they see from him. I haven't heard a whole lot about Mark Zachary so far. Actually, sorry. That's a follow-up to his question. He also mentioned Golden here. I mean, Tom, other than the updates we've already put on the board and talked about in the shows, if you're asking from what we've seen, nothing's changed. We just haven't seen enough to really give strong opinions of those guys so far.
Then from J. Melvin Bryan, you've mentioned this a couple of times, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this. How did Brian Kelly and his OC ruin Dane Crisp back in 2009 and 2010?
Didn't coach him at all. Just didn't work with him, didn't coach him. Charlie Molnar would just thought he should know certain things, and when he didn't, he would just hammer him. And if Dane couldn't pick something up schematically, it was just kind of get mad at him and yell at him instead of like, hey, let's work with him on this. And part of being a good coach is knowing how to connect with a player. And I don't believe in, like, if you have a soft-minded kid, you don't baby him. I don't believe in that. But I do believe to a coach, there's a level of, you got to figure out how you connect with this kid. I've shared this story before, Trev, but when I was at Christopher Newport, my two top receivers, one kid his dad was like literally a drill sergeant. So like, if I'm just talking to him normally, he doesn't really register I'm being corrected. His way of correcting was loud and in your face. And you know what I mean? Like, that's when he knew. Otherwise, it's just conversation to him. Another kid came from a background where, he was a mixed race kid in a very country town that didn't view that relationship properly. He dealt with a lot of stuff, a lot of men in his life from a coaching standpoint, he had some bad experiences with men. So when I yell at him, ear shut, head down. So I had to reach him differently. And actually, what's funny is he and I had a conversation after his career was over when he was looking to get into coaching. He was kind of upset. He goes, why didn't you get on me like you did the other two kids? And I said, one thing you'll learn when you get into coaching is you treat all your kids fairly. You don't treat them all the same, because not every kid learns the same way. When I would yell at you, you would stop listening and put your head down, and nothing I said to you would register. And so I had to talk to you a certain way. If I'd have talked to the other kids like that, it wouldn't have registered. And I had to explain it to him. He's like, he understood it then, but he just thought that I thought he was soft. And it wasn't about him being soft. I said, did I demand less of you? Did I evaluate your play? He goes, no, you were harder on me as far as when we break down film, you were harder on me, but you wouldn't yell at me. You wouldn't get on. I said, exactly. I expected more from you because you are our best receiver, but my communication style had to be different or you wouldn't hear me. And I don't think they gave a crap about trying to figure out how Dane learned. I think it shows the difference between a great coach and a not good coach. What was the thing that Aaron Henry said that he asked Mike Mickens about when he got hired? I asked him, how do these kids learn? That's a coach who gets it. Not, hey, I'm the coach. They got to adapt to me. To a degree, that's true. But it's more so of like, hey, if this is how Leonard Moore learns, he's a chalkboard guy. You put it on the chalkboard, Leonard Moore's going to figure it out. Christian Gray is more of I got to go out and walk it through and guy. Whereas Dallas Golden's more of he needs the rep. Like, he'll learn some of it on the board, some of it in the walkthrough, but he's got to fail first. So you got to put him in position of, I'm making all of these up. I don't know if those kids learn that way. I'm just giving you types and attributing it to a specific player. But that's what Aaron Henry's got to learn. So if a kid doesn't get it on the chalkboard, then okay, then I just don't say, well, screw him. He can't figure it out on the board or off of the film. Then I'm just going to bury him and not play him. I was like, okay, how do you learn? Okay, you need to go out there and walk through it. Then let's walk through it. And they just seem to have zero interest in that. And Charlie Molnar made a comment like that. Like, like, it's not my job to do. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of is your freaking job, you clown. And that's why he's no longer coaching. But Brian Kelly had a lot of self-important guys on his staff. He's one. Brian Polian's one. But congrats to Brian Polian, though. He's now the head coach at John Carroll D3 school, which I have no shame of. But it's awesome that he finally found an AD that thought he was good enough to be hired as a head coach. Now, granted, he's the AD, but still, you found an AD that thinks you're worthy of being a head football coach. There's one out there. It's you, but there's at least one out there.
From Tom Redinger, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that Jags is going to come back and is a move blocking tight end at the end of the year? And why is your answer a 9?
My answer is not a 9. Honestly, at this point in time, guys, I'm a 1. I'll believe that Charles Jagasaw is going to be able to play football again when I see Charles Jagasaw go out on a field on a Saturday or maybe a Sunday in the instance of the first season opener plays. I'm just not. And this kind of is in response to, Archer was saying, hey, I can't rank Notre Dame higher because their offensive line is injury prone. And I was like, oh, no, there's only one guy that's injury prone. And his response was, what about Jagasaw? And I was like, I'm not counting Jagasaw. When I talk about Notre Dame's talent on the offensive line, Jagasaw is not even in my conversation, because if he was, there's not even a question mark, because now you have 3 top 10 to 15 NFL caliber draft picks in your line. I'm not even counting Jagasaw right now in my evaluation of the line. I'll just have to, when I heard Rob Hunt explain the 5 different procedures he's had to go through on top of some other things I heard, I said, if that kid plays again, that'll be amazing. But I'm not. And I'm not saying he won't play again. I'm saying in my evaluation of this team and the line, I'm not counting him as a part of it until I see him out there playing, and then playing at a certain level. That's where I'm at.
Yep. Same page here, man. I get you completely. From Archer, a resident Ohio State fan, what is the best coaching staff in Notre Dame history?
I mean, I can't tell you Notre Dame history because I can only tell you in my lifetime. I don't know who – I couldn't tell you who was on Newt Rockney's coaching staff. And coaching staffs were very different in their era, in the Frank Leahy era, compared to what they are now.
Yeah.
In my lifetime, it's the 88 coaching staff. I mean, you had Barry Alvarez, Joe Moore, and Lou Holtz on the staff. That to me is kind of like enough. But there were some other really good coaches on those staffs as well. But that would have to be the one for me. What's funny is Bob Davie actually had some pretty good assistant coaching staffs.
Yeah, like
there
Charlie
was one
Strong
that had,
and Urban
Charlie
Meyer.
Strong and Urban Meyer on it. Yeah, but it's hard to like some. Joe Moore, John Palermo was on that 88 coaching staff. You remember him, Trev? He was a guy that had a lot of success. Chuck Heater is a very well known coach on that team. So yeah, you had a great coaching staff back then as well. Great coaching staff. The offensive coordinator, I believe, on that team was Lou Holtz, I believe. But that was a very, very good coaching staff. Very good coaching staff. And of course, we all know what Barry Alvarez went on to do.
And I think in my lifetime, I think it's 2024, and I don't even know if it's a debate.
Yeah.
You had Mike Denbrock, Al Golden, Dela McCullough. You had Mike Mickens. That staff was there's a reason that despite all those injuries, they still played for a national title.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Archer changed it and said, what is the best indie coaching staff in your lifetime? He changed it after he said that.
Well played.
I would argue that the interesting thing is that's not the best. Like that, agree, of your lifetime best coaching staff. The sad thing is there have been better offensive staffs than that one. But they were ruined by, you had Mike Denbrock and Harry Heastand on a coaching staff together.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty good. With Tony, actually at one point in time in 2014, those coaches plus Tony Alford. And it got ruined because you had Numbnuts as your defensive coordinator. I'm sorry, did I say that? Brian Van Gorder. And also in 2014, here's what's crazy. The Notre Dame 2014 offensive coaching staff. You had Harry Heastand as your offensive line coach. Mike Denbrock was your offensive coordinator on that team. Yeah, and I believe Tony Alford was your running backs coach. And Matt LaFleur was your quarterbacks coach. And then Scott Booker was your tight ends coach, and I believe Scott Booker is currently on the New England Patriots coaching staff. That was your offensive coaching staff. Mike Denbrock, Harry Heastand, Tony Alford, Matt LaFleur, who's currently the head freaking coach of the Packers, and Scott Booker was your offensive staff. And that team went 7-8-5 because you had Brian Van Gorder as your defensive coordinator. Yeah. Your GA on that team, Trev, the GA on that team is a kid by the name Ryan Mahaffey. People who have followed me for a long time know who he is. He was a guy that went on to be an offensive coordinator at Northern Iowa and is currently in the NFL. He's the run game coordinator and tight ends coach for the Eagles. He was the GA, and Mike Denbrock trusted him to do a lot of good things, like to work with receivers a lot. So even they had a GA back then that was really good. Ryan Mahaffey, who's now a run game coordinator in the National Football League, tight ends coach in the National Football League with the Eagles, was the Packers receivers coach the previous 2 years. So that was a great offensive staff. It just got ruined because you had as a head coach and a even bigger as your defensive coordinator. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. This is always one that comes up. What would Notre Dame have been like if Barry Alvarez had been head coach after Lou? I really think they would have gotten back to being similar. Like I don't know, would they have ever had like an 88 or an 89 stretch? I don't know. But they would have continued to be exactly like they were from like 90 to 93. They would have been a worst years 9-3, best years you're a title contender. Would they have had the elite talent they had in 88 and 89? I don't think so, because you didn't have Vinny Serrato doing the recruiting anymore, and you didn't have the charisma of Lou Holtz. But they'd have been a perennially very good football team. Agree completely.
For sure.
Would they have won a title? I don't know. I don't know that, but they would have been very, very good.
Another one from Riley Erdman. Based off of what we've seen in his potential, do you think that Tay Johnson could be one of the best safeties Notre Dame has ever had?
It's possible. I'll say this. Look, I think Tay has a chance to be one of, like, in the group of the top 6 to 7 guys. Do I think he can be better than what Harrison Smith was or Xavier Watts was, who I think are the 2 best safeties at Notre Dame? Kyle Hamilton is a great NFL player, and he was great in 2020.
Yeah.
But he was a backup and a rotation guy in 19, and he got hurt halfway through 2021. We just didn't see enough of Kyle. Like, Kyle in his prime was great at Notre Dame. But we saw 2 years of greatness from Xavier Watts, 2 years of greatness from Harrison Smith, and that's really something that separates. But in my lifetime, I got to go back to Jeff Burris in 93, was a heck of a player. You've got to look at the Glenn Earl Jerome Sapp combo from 2002 and 3, which was outstanding. Alohi Gilman is in that conversation. And then obviously Xavier Watts, who's number 1. But could he be in we're 5-10 years from now, we're talking about him the same way we talk about Harrison Smith and Kyle Hamilton and Xavier Watts and Alohi Gilman and Glenn Earl and Pat Terrell and Jeff Burris? Absolutely. He's got the potential to be that kind of guy, no question. Can he stay healthy? That's my only question mark about Tay Johnson. Can he stay healthy?
Yeah,
that's it. He's an instinctive football player. He's tough. He's a playmaker. He's athletic. He's got all the tools you want. Can he stay healthy? That's the only question that I have about Tay. That's it.
Yep, absolutely. His health will decide whether he's closer to the Kyle Hamilton end of that spectrum of the conversation, or if he's closer to the Harrison Smith, Xavier Watts end of the conversation.
Right.
It's just health.
Yep. Because, like, you could make a case that if Kyle would have played all of 2021, maybe I look at his career differently than I do Xavier Watts. But, I also think he was better in 2020 than he was in 2021. If I'm being honest, even before the injuries.
From Archer, what is the minimum expectation for the season for Notre Dame this season for it to be considered a successful year?
You reach your full potential. I mean, I think that's the key for me. I think too much of it is like you got to win a title or it's an unsuccessful season. And when it comes to the ultimate Notre Dame standard, that's true. But I've said this, if Notre Dame runs the table, they're as good as they should be, and they get to the semifinals and they play their tails off and they play a great game, but one of those, Oregon, Texas, Ohio State is just better than they are, that doesn't make it an unsuccessful season. Same thing if they lose in the championship game. It's if they lose because they didn't play to their potential and they lost to a team that we all view as an inferior team to them, then that's disappointing. I will say that I kind of would argue that if you don't run the table in the regular season and then lose, that would make me a little bit more disappointed. But if you beat all the teams you're supposed to beat and then you just get beat by one of those top 3 teams that we talked about, and they're just better than you are, that's a successful season. You've moved the needle. Now go on the recruiting trail and in the portal and address, and with your coaching staff, and address the areas where you're not as good as them and get better. But the ultimate standard at Notre Dame is you win a championship. So from the big picture, championship or bust, I'm with you on that. That's the standard. But when you evaluate, did you move the program forward? That's that second level of evaluation. And we've always said there's two different ways to evaluate it. One is the ultimate standard, which is if you don't win a championship, it's a disappointing season because you're Notre Dame. The other level is, did you get the most out of this football team, and did you move the program forward? There's a world in which the second answer to that is yes, but you don't win a championship.
Yeah, my minimum expectation, I'm absolutely with you, reaching your full potential. But if they do that, which is what my expectation is, if we're putting it on to like what the season is going to be considered, my minimum expectation is making the semifinals. Making, not necessarily winning, but making the semifinals. I think Notre Dame is a team that's in position to receive a bye. You're telling me they can't win a postseason game? Like, I think Notre Dame has one of the top 4 rosters in the entire country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for me to picture a world where they're not amongst the top 4 remaining teams left.
Yep.
And that's how I look at that. So, and I know for some that can seem steep. It's like your minimum expectation is a college football playoff semifinal. It's like, well, to Brian's point, big picture, my expectation year in and year out, you should expect to win a championship at Notre Dame.
Right.
But for this season specifically, the minimum expectation is you make the college football playoff semifinals because you did that with a less
to a team that's better than you.
Yeah.
Not almost as good as you, but better than you. Because like right now, we have Notre Dame as the number 1 roster in the country, right? And we think this is a good coaching staff. There's some question marks, but there's some question marks. I mean, how's Arthur Smith going to be as the OC at Ohio State? We don't know the answer to that. There's a lot of those question marks. How will Muschamp be as the new D coordinator at Texas? How Oregon's got 2 new coordinators. Like there's a lot of those questions for a lot of teams, right? And so take that out. And to Trev's point, you lose short of the semifinals, you lost to an inferior team. Well, but you lost to one of those top 4 rosters. Yeah, but clearly that roster wasn't as good as it should have been because they were not a top 4 seed. You know what I mean? And you lost to a team that didn't play to its potential all season. But what if we're wrong and they have the second best roster in college football? And the team with the best roster beats them in the semis or the championship in a great game where you're like, dude, they coached well. They played their butts off. They just got beat. And look, I coached on 2 teams, that made it to the playoffs. And one year we got beat and I was pissed because we lost to an inferior opponent. The other year we won our first round. We went down to Texas in the first round of the national playoffs and beat Hardin Simmons. And they had a receiver, Kirk Rogers, who played in the NFL. And that was a talented football team. The second round of the playoffs, we go down to Kentucky. We beat Thomas More 41-0. We were a good football team. Mount Union kicked the crap out of us, Trev, and we coached well, and our kids played as well as they could. That team was just that much better than us. And it's one of those things where you look back and you say, what do I somehow tell my football players that their season wasn't good enough because we didn't win a championship, when the reality is the team that beat us was just a lot better than us? I mean, I couldn't justify doing that. And so, what's funny is starting defensive end for that team was Matt Campbell, the now head coach at Penn State. But they had like this kid named Larry Kennard at left tackle who was going to go to Ohio State, but couldn't qualify. He was like 6'7", 300 pounds. Like our starting DN was like 6 foot 230. Like their offensive line was like 3 bills across the board. They were just better than we were. And our kids played their butts off. But, that's just kind of where it's at.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know who that team is, though. Ultimately, Trev, is right now, I think this team should win it all. But I'm also trying to give you guys a fair answer of like, this is what would make me not be okay with winning it all. But I do expect this team to win a championship this year. I do.
From Sign Cosine Tangent, Dante Moore or CJ Carr, who's better?
Whoever plays for your team. I mean, like, honestly, seriously, Notre Dame fans are going to think CJ's better. Oregon fans are going to think Dante better. And you know what? They're both should be very happy with their quarterbacks. I personally think CJ's better. I have originally, when they were being recruited, I liked Dante more when he was a senior and CJ was a junior. I thought CJ's senior year was better than Dante's senior year. And there's some things I like better about CJ. There's some things I like better about Dante. I think they're both great quarterbacks. Like, honestly, like, as a Notre Dame fan, would I rather have CJ Carr over everybody else? Yeah, of course, because he chose to be here and he's an elite talent. But I'm sure Texas fans are like, I love CJ Carr. He's a great player, but Arch is our guy. I'm assuming Oregon fans are like, yeah, okay, you CJ Carr is good, but we got Dante. I'm sure that's how they're going to feel, and that's okay because those are great quarterbacks. I think CJ is. But if someone's going to try to convince me, here's my case for Dante Moore, I might have a couple pushbacks, a couple questions, but I'm not going to really be like, okay, I get you. Now, an Ohio State fan wants to try to say Julian Sand, that I'm going to argue with. I just had to. Sorry, Archer. Just had to. Let's go to the next one. Let me ask this one, Trev, because I'm curious to get your opinion of this one first before I give mine. Michael Cannon asks, Notre Dame wins the national championship. The next morning, the national pundits are saying what?
Oh, God. I mean, I think Sean and I got this question last week, Michael. It's a great question. I mean, look, I think it comes down to one of two things. One, all the credit's going to go to Marcus Freeman. It won't be about the state of the roster. It'll be, look what Marcus Freeman did with the talent level at Notre Dame. They're going to talk about blue chip ratios, and they're going to talk about all that stuff. Or it's a down year for college football. This team didn't pan out to be what we thought. This team didn't pan out to be what they thought. There's going to be a minority that I think gives credit where credit's due, like the Landon Tangwells, the David Pollocks, and so I think it'll be some of that. But by and large, it'll be a lot of it was a down year in college football. Look what Marcus Freeman got out of this team when nobody thought. And even though the track record won't back up that narrative, it'll be a lot of that.
I'm curious, Trev. I think part of it, there's just a lot of context here that factors in for me. And part of that is, who do they beat on the path to the championship? Like, one of the reasons that I think Indiana got a lot of love when they won a championship is because they beat Bama, they destroyed Oregon, and they beat Miami. And they had also beaten Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. Like, what's your knock? What can you possibly say to diminish that team? Where I do think, like, when Michigan won it, I'm not saying it's fair, but I think you can point to, like, they beat a not very good Bama team and beat a Washington team that, is good, but not a great team. They never had to play Georgia. That's the knock. And the cheating thing, right? Like, okay, I get that, but sure. If Notre Dame, let's say there's an upset. Let's say the Notre Dame's the 3 seed. And let's say the number 6 seed is either not a very big name team, or let's say there's an upset and Notre Dame beats an OK 6 or an 11 seed that's not very good. Let's say that the 6 seed is like Clemson and Notre Dame beats Clemson. Like, who cares? And then the semifinals, they beat Texas Tech. And then the championship game, they beat, I don't know, Indiana, somebody that's not named Ohio State or Texas or Bama. You know what I mean? Georgia. I could see like a little bit of, or let's flip it. Let's say they beat Georgia in the semis and then beat Texas Tech in the championship. I think you're going to hear a lot of, yeah, but, like Trev said, down year, Texas Tech got lucky beating Ohio State or Texas or whoever. Georgia, is like 1-3 in their last 3 playoffs. They're not the team they used to be. You didn't have to play Texas. You didn't have to play Oregon. You didn't have to play Ohio State. You didn't have to beat Indiana. Those teams beat each other up. Let's say that Notre Dame, beats Georgia convincingly and Texas Tech plays a 4-quarter battle. They're worn out. There's all types of excuses that people would make to kind of downplay it a little bit. But I think if Notre Dame makes a run in the playoff where they're beating some blue bloods, then I think that you'll see respect. And a big reason why is because I think that you're seeing more and more national media people, football people, respect the fact that Notre Dame's really talented. And I think that they have a head coach who's likable. There will be clowns like Paul Feinbaum and people like that won't give them credit. But I think Kirk Herbstreit won't be diminishing the championship. David Pollock won't. Greg McElroy won't. Joel Klatt won't. Like most of the respected talking heads, I think, would give Notre Dame love if they won a championship and they had to beat at least 1 or 2 blue bloods. Now, if they have to beat Bama in the quarters and Georgia in the semis or Ohio State in the semis, and then they beat Texas Tech in the title game, I think they'll get respect. Kind of like how the Michigan basketball team, a lot of people say the UConn game was kind of the consolation prize. Like the title game was Michigan and Arizona. Now the game ended up being a lot more competitive, but Michigan still won. But it was like beating Arizona is the one that really gave them the respect for being the best team, that kind of thing. I think that would be where I would say you've got to beat some blue bloods, in my opinion, to get there. And in that case, I don't think you're going to hear a lot of anything other than Marcus Freeman's done a great job. Then quickly it'll turn to, but can they do it again in an attempt to try to downplay it a little bit? But no, I think actually because of Marcus Freeman being a guy that a lot of people respect, I don't think we'll see as much of the talking down from the bigger talking heads. It'll be the clowns. It'll be the trolls. It'll be the Paul Feinbaums. The Skip Bayless will probably say something moronic just because that's his shtick. Stephen A. Smith might say something that makes us remember why he should only talk about basketball. Cam Newton will say something stupid. But like the majority will give Notre Dame love. I think. So I think also, Trev, the fact that they've been building to this and it didn't just come out of nowhere, I think also would factor in too. This isn't like they've been 8-4, 8-4, 8-4, and then boom, championship team, veteran team. I think the fact that they've been here before, people felt the way they did about the team last year, I think factors into that as well. Last couple, Trev, before we get out of here. Real quick from Tommy Guns. He says, is cynical thought, is Pete letting the basketball program suffer just so he can make a hire? No, because if Pete wanted to he could just fire Micah Shrewsbury and go hire somebody else. I promise you Micah Shrewsbury doesn't have a ginormous, impossible to get out of buyout. I think there's a lot of other reasons why he is not making a change. Part of it being that they just don't feel that Micah Shrewsbury is completely proven that he's not the guy. We may not agree on that, but that could factor into it. If you were to tell me too that they're just not spending the money on this team because they're going to go all in on winning a championship for Hannah Hidalgo, I'd be like, cool, let's do it. With all due respect to the men's team, we're going to take a couple mil away from you because we got to go get Hannah some bigs because we think we can win it all next year with Hannah and an elite recruiting class coming in. I'm like, all right, cool. I think you can do both at Notre Dame, but I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of reasons why. I don't think it's because of that. There's no value in letting your football. They were so bad this year. He'd have every reason he needs to fire Micah Shrewsbury. They were the second to worst team in a league that is mediocre. Think about that. So there's other reasons why they're keeping him that have nothing to do with that, in my opinion.
From Riley Erdman, do you guys think that Marcus Freeman has any major flaws in his coaching, if any at all?
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't won a championship yet, so clearly there's some things that he has to fix. Number one is you got to be better in September. Whatever you're doing in fall camp, your team is not great in September. You've lost your season opening game in what? Or you've lost your season opening game in 2 of your 4 years, and you've lost the second game of the season in 3 of 4 years. So, because they lost game 2 in 22, they lost game 2 in 24, and they lost game 2 in 25. Marcus Freeman has got, he's got 3, 4. He lost 4 games in year 1, right? And then 7. Then he's lost 11 games in his career so far, correct? I think he's only lost, 2 in November? And 1 was in 22. You lost 2 in September in your first year. You lost 1 in September in 24, and you lost 2 in September in 2025. You lost 5 of your 11 games in the first month of the season, in August, September, because obviously, you know what I mean. And then you've got 2 losses in November, 1 loss in January, and then 3 losses in hold on. So 5 in September, 2 in November, 1 in January. So then only 3 in October, and I believe
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You've lost 6 games in September because Ohio State was also in September in 2023. So over half your losses were in the first month of the season. The other 3 months you play in, October, November, December/January, you've lost 5 games, one of which was the national title game, another of which was to the top 5 team. That should have beat you by way more than 11 if we want to compare rosters in 2022. That's a big one. And I also think that I would like for him to be a little bit more critical of some of the coaches on the staff, that if they don't step things up this season, be more willing to make a change. I won't say who, but there's 2 coaches that are assistant coaches that I think if they don't really have big improvements this year, need to be gone. And I don't know that he's shown me a willingness to fire a coach just for his performance. Every coach he's fired so far, for the most part, has been due to something else. He didn't fire Chancey Stuckey because he wasn't a good receivers coach. He fired Chancey Stuckey because of the way that he was building that room. I don't know that he would have fired Jared Parker if Jared Parker didn't get another job. I think he encouraged Jared Parker to take another job, but I don't know that he would have fired him. Maybe demoted him, but not fired him. And so I that's one for me.
Yeah, the biggest thing is getting his team consistently ready to play inferior opponents. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I have more questions about Notre Dame and going and playing a bad team than I do a good team. I know if they play a good team, they're going to be ready, they're going to be physical, they're going to be focused, but it's those teams that you should beat. Clemson at 23, a lot of people look at the logo. They had 8 starters out. Louisville in 23, they got dominated by an inferior opponent. They got dominated by Marshall and Northern Illinois in the trenches. At a place like Notre Dame, like you lost and you weren't prepared for, for Boston College. Yeah, you won by 15. That game was ugly.
Mm-hmm.
That game was ugly, and they were in a significantly inferior opponent. That's my biggest flaw with them, is how can you maintain a consistent level of focus with programs that are just not close to your level?
The difference that I would say, Trevor, is obviously now those things don't result in losses. Now, the way that they did in 22 and 23, because your team is so much more talented. You don't lose. This same exact roster could have played the same exact way they did in 24 against Northern Illinois, and they would win. This same exact roster could play exactly the way they did against Marshall in 2022 and win by 2-3 touchdowns.
Sure.
Same thing against Stanford in 2022. So, like, you've done a better job. And my point being, sometimes your talent can mask that you haven't fixed a problem. So I don't think just winning those games necessarily means, okay, you're not losing to those bad teams anymore, so you've fixed that problem. Because I would argue, well, playing the way you did against BC is not a whole lot different than the way that you played against Marshall in 2022. You just have a way better roster now. I would also say that you could kind of make a case that a lot of teams have one of those a year. And I would argue that you've had fewer of those this past year than you did in previous years. So that's at least progress. But you got to make sure that you don't have one of those games on a night when you play somebody good, which they kind of did, at least defensively last year against Texas A&M. So I think the big one for me, September's the one thing for sure that we can look back on and say, like, I'm not at all worried about them losing to a Marshall or a Stanford or Northern Illinois again. I'm just not. Because of where this team is, they're better coached, they've got more talent, all these other things. I am still concerned that you're going to lose to an Ohio State, a Texas A&M, a Miami in September when you have them. That has not been proven to me that you can fix that. And honestly, Trev, I don't know that you're going to answer that question this year.
I mean, not this year, not with the schedule they have in September.
Yeah. I mean, because like if they dominate in October, November, it's like, well, yeah, okay, we knew that, and maybe Auburn in 2027. Let's see how that schedule finishes. We don't know how. I mean, right now they've only got 9 teams scheduled for 2027. It may not be till 2028 that we find the answer to that question when they start the season off with Texas and Arkansas. But yeah, that'll be a big one. And can you get your offensive line and defensive line to play at an elite level? I wouldn't call that a flaw. I just say that's something he still needs to prove.
Yeah.
And this is your best chance to prove that. This is your most talented unit. No, is there a Joe Wald on this team like N23? No, but I think you're just better everywhere else. I think Yerby Lambert's better than Blake Fisher. I think that Ashton Craig's better than Pat Coogan. I think that Anthony Knapp and Sullivan Absher are better than Rocco Spindler, and who was the other guard in 2023? Rocco was one. Who was the other guard?
Pat Coogan was your other guard.
I thought he was
injury.
who was this? Oh, Zeke Carell is your center. I think Ashton's a better center than Zeke, and I think that Sully and Snap are better than Coogan and Rocco at guard. Yeah, I'm sort of thinking, no, I'm like, no, Pat was a center. No, Pat didn't move to center until 2024. He was the left guard in 23. Well done, Trev. So yeah, that's an interesting one. And then the last one, Trev. Brian, do you think Michigan would have still won the title if they had to go through either Texas, Georgia, or Oregon in 2023? I do. Look, I don't think Michigan would have beaten some teams from other years, but I do think Michigan was – I don't know that you can do a whole lot to take away the championship in 23 in regard to who they would have beat. Number one, they beat Washington, who beat Texas. They beat Alabama, who beat Georgia. I mean, I know it's a transitive property, but like that was the previous game they played. It wasn't like they beat Alabama, who beat Georgia in September. Alabama beat Georgia in their most recent game. And you and I have said before, Trev, that Georgia team was a little overrated because the SEC East sucked. And Bama was just better than they were. And then Texas was a good team, but Texas got beat by Washington in a game I don't think Texas ever led. If they did, it would have been like the first score of the game. I mean, they had to come back to even make it a game. And then, of course, they beat Ohio State that year. Oregon, I mean, that'd be an interesting one. But I don't know that there's any evidence that Dan Lanning would have been able to step up in a big game and perform. I mean, they lost to Washington twice. I mean, how can I say that Michigan would have lost to Oregon when they beat Washington, who beat Oregon twice? So every team that they beat in the playoffs beat the team that you asked me if Michigan could have beat. So other than just hating Michigan, I don't know what argument I could make to say they would have lost to somebody else. Now, would they have lost a rematch to Ohio State? Maybe. Would they have lost a rematch to somebody? Maybe. Could Georgia have beat them? Sure, they could have, but I wouldn't have predicted it. Guys, that was a very talented Michigan team. And I understand that the cheating and all that, but they beat Ohio State after the cheating thing got made clear. There was no way that they were still doing that stuff in the end of the season. In their last 4 games, they beat number 10, number 24, number 5, and number 2. They also beat number 13 on the road that year. I mean, I hate Michigan, Trev, but we have to give that team their due. That was a talented football team. I mean, they had, 3 very high draft picks on the D-line that year. I mean, that team was loaded, absolutely loaded for that season. Would they have beat 22 Georgia? Not even close. It would not even been a game. Could they have beat 24 Ohio State? Not the playoff version. They could clearly beat the regular season version of Ohio State. But that 23 Michigan team, if they played the 24 version of Ohio State, playoff Ohio State, they don't beat that team. It just depends on, but they didn't have to play those teams. They had to play the 25 versions or the 23 versions. In the 23 version, Michigan was better. Yeah, they cheated. I get all that. But, they still beat people. How can I say that teams that beat the teams or lost to the teams that they beat would have somehow beat them? I just don't know how I can make that argument.
Oh, it's just tough. We're talking about a team that went undefeated through the playoffs, Big Ten championship game, and through the regular season. Is there a team that could have beat them? Maybe. Because then we start getting into the discussion of who was the better team on that day and who, it gets messy. All I know is they went undefeated 15-0 and won the Natty.
Would you argue that the Ohio State, Alabama, or Washington games were games where you watched and you're like, that was a bit of a fluky game? I thought they were the better team or equal to the team that they played every time. I thought the Alabama game was probably the most competitive, but I still felt Michigan was as good, if not better, than Alabama in that game.
Yeah, it's because what they did wasn't sexy. They didn't beat teams by airing it out. They beat teams by holding them to 13 points and dominating in the trenches and running the ball really well. So it opens the door of but if you have a team that could beat them over the top, it's but there's a reason teams couldn't beat them over the top.
Right.
I mean, they beat Washington.
Will Johnson didn't suck.
No, I mean, they beat Washington by double digits, and that was a team that had Jalen Polk and Roma Dunze and Michael Penix.
McMillan.
Yeah, it's just sometimes you just kind of have to give credit where credit's due, even if it's a team that you hate.
I also think that 23 Georgia team was very overrated.
Absolutely.
They looked ugly against beating South Carolina, barely beat Auburn on the road, had to come back and beat Missouri at home. Looked average against a bad Georgia Tech team, and then lost Alabama. Like, other than the hype the media gave them, there was nothing about that 23 Georgia team that should have made anyone think, boy, that team would have beat Michigan if they played them. Nothing other than what they look like in past years. And I don't care that they beat Florida State's second string by 60, because that's who they beat in the bowl game, was their second string. And so in some cases, third string players.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think that they were that. I hate Michigan with a passion. I have no desire for Notre Dame to ever play Michigan again, but I'm also not going to allow my hatred to make me give a bad evaluation. That 23 Michigan team was the best team that year. I don't think they would have beat the best teams from the years that bordered them, but that's not what they are judged on. So anyway, Trev, that'll do it, man. Let's wrap up so people can head on over to IB Nation Sports Talk.
Yeah, they got a good topic going on tonight. They're going to talk about what we know about Notre Dame throughout spring thus far, so be sure to tune into them. They kick off here in about 3 minutes. As for us, Brian and I will be back tomorrow. I believe there's going to be a post-practice report that we have on the midweek rundown, along with a bunch of other topics, so you're not going to want to miss that show either. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards and boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.